I can't wait to talk about China while sipping from my China bottle, sitting on my Chinese table, looking at my Chinese-produced screens, writing on my Chinese-produced and assembled computer, surrounded by Chinese memorabilia and those that are not literal memorabilia from China, probably also printed, put together, 3D printed, electrified, also in China. So all I'm saying is a hella hypocrite. Why do we not use this against people that are like, I like capitalism? The way they're like, you like socialism, but iPhone? We should say, you like capitalism, but
your
everything.
whole life.
But everything you've ever possessed.
Yeah.
Everything from your pacemaker to your cock ring, everything.
I used to find it cringe when guys were like, roads are socialism. Like, in a meta way they are, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when somebody was like, I hate socialism, and they would say, well, then you hate roads. Roads are socialism. But as you get older, you're like, that's kind of a based take. Like, that's kind of like correct. Like, what the fuck? Like, you know?
I get what you mean in like a, like grand scheme of things.
It does sound funny.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it reminds me of that meme of that guy, that Chinese guy on Instagram. That's the one Chinese guy on Instagram.
Yep.
Where he's like, let's play a game, person in America. Go and point to the things that are made in China in your home. Okay, now I'll play a game. I'll point to the things made in the USA in my home. And it's just, there's nothing.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's what we need more of, just the humiliation. American-centric humiliation.
I mean, you don't need this. It's begun. It will continue. Inshallah, it will be far longer than a century. But the opioid epidemic is the exact, the inverse of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, God, that's such. I feel so bad for those people. Jesus Christ. And your government sucks that they just let it happen. Well, we're not here to be, what's it called, humane. We're here to meme. And I have one major meme for you,
please,
JT. Or it's not a meme actually. It's a bit of news. I think you, JT will. A good thing we're not on camera because you will bust all over your computer when I tell you this.
Let's go.
I have begun watching Avatar: The Last Airbender.
No way, dude!
And
I thought you were fully opposed.
I am on season 3, like episode 10 or something. I'm almost done with the original series.
Yeah.
It fucking slaps.
Thank you.
I love it.
Yeah,
when
it's
I started,
so wholesome and fun.
Yeah. It's not even that. It's not about it's wholesome. It's that when I first, like the first couple episodes, like, they're progressing the story very quickly, like very much for like a kid's cartoon. This is going to be a chill kid's cartoon. And then they start developing like this depth.
Yeah.
That I was not expecting
There's
whatsoever.
some commentary there, yeah.
Yeah, not some. There's plenty. I mean, some shit is a little bit like liberal cringe.
Yeah.
But a lot
What
of
do you
it.
expect?
Yeah, of course. But a lot of it is like, I'm surprised. And the like cultural diversity and unique presentation. Like, I've not seen something like this. I'm genuinely surprised at how good of a show it is.
Yeah. I'm so happy. Oh, that makes my heart feel good.
We're gonna finish that, and then we're gonna do the next one is The Legend of Korra, whatever it's called.
Yeah, I don't think I ever finished that. I watched the first season, really liked it, from what I could remember. But then after that, I don't recall if I watched any more of it. I think there are 3 seasons of it. I don't know.
But
All I know is Korra is hot.
We found the cartoon lover.
Let's go. I promise.
You do not
it's a 7,000-year-old dragon, I promise.
She's not real, so it's not illegal.
Oh my God. I love it. There's this video of this sheikh somewhere, and he's talking like in Arabic. He's like the translator is like, have you heard of this concept called the waifu? Like, the waifu is like like morals have degenerated, or like manliness has degenerated in some sectors to such an extent that they began, instead of like trying to approach women and having wholesome relations in marriage with women, they've begun romanticizing cartoons, and their favorite cartoon characters they refer to as their waifus. He says it.
It's awesome, I guess. Yeah.
He's like, the word wife, like, zoj, like the Arabic he translates, and then wife, he tries to explain what the U is. He doesn't really understand.
That's cute.
Oh my God. I'll send it. Maybe we'll put it in the edit.
Please do.
So that's what's happening there. But my favorite part is I'm watching this, and then with a friend of mine, we watched the Battle of Algiers, the uncut version, and because a lot of it is in this particular friend of mine does not speak Arabic that well. Mm-hmm. Although he speaks it well enough, but not for some of the nuances of the Algerian dialect spoken in the movie. So I'm sitting there and I'm giving him like little, like, oh, they said this, but the subtitles aren't exactly right. But they said, and I think it took us 3 hours to get through a 2-hour movie because of the live Hakeem
This
commentary.
is the Hakeem commentary experience. Any movie we watch with this man. Pausing, pointing excitedly.
You love it. You motherfuckers love it. You eat it up.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I wouldn't trade it.
Habibi.
But it's nice that we made a full spin. It's kind of like a metaphor for a relationship. One is fucking the other guy, but we don't like mix, if you know what I mean. We keep this podcast relationship strictly segregated. like I shoved a big fat Italian Sopranos sausage into JT, and he started watching it. Then he shoved a big magic Avatar stick into Hakeem, and he started watching it. And now, in order to connect the chain, I need something in me from you, Hakeem. So give me some show recommendations.
You know what?
Don't necessarily immediately have to revolve around revolutionary and anti-imperialist politics.
I know
wait,
one.
that is impossible. He has never watched something of that type.
You know what?
Yes.
You are. You would be
movie.
right. You would be right, but now I am married, and as a result, my wife shares a lot of things with me that I would never consider watching before, like Korean dramas that she likes. Nice. And I watched one called Prison Notebook that I highly recommend. Watch it with your ladies.
Of course, it's
right?
Prison Notebook. Yeah, you had to get at least a reference to some kind of socialist figure in there.
It's lit Prison Notebook. Really, you just went on a rant about how it's. I'm gonna fucking kill myself. Why do I love you so much?
Excuse me.
Like, you're
Prison
a cunt.
Playbook, it's called,
Like,
not Notebook. You're right. My mind is so fucking broken.
I knew it.
I feel true love, and I want to beat you. What is? Oh my God.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Deprogram. Today we will have most likely our longest episode yet. We'll see how long it ends up being. Okay, so today we will be covering China. This is the first installment of maybe 3 or 4. We're trying to keep it to 2. We'll see. Today's episode is supposed to be a general overview and the China criticism episode, really, with the nuance, of course. We're not going to be like, oh, they don't have fucking, I don't know, you can't
Burger King.
pay for your Burger King burger or your Pizza Hut order through Klarna, 16 payments with 30% interest, right? That's not the criticism that we're going to be doing, but more nuanced and materially based and actually based Marxist analysis here. Today's episode there's going to be some overlap, of course, but the point of today's episode is to treat China as a real historical socialist project, one that has made real gains and real strategic and deep strategic failures. Today's episode 1, we will not go too deep into the history. This is kind of like a modern China episode. We might do more history things in the future, but not particularly today. The core essence of the episode, though, is China is a socialist country with real socialist democracy in anti-imperialist substance, but at the same time, it has deep structural contradictions and flaws that cannot be hand-waved away. You can't hand-wave them away without abandoning the concept of Marxism itself. So we're not trying to do like moralism from a liberal lens. We're not trying to do this campist, denial of everything. Oh no, China's the most perfect country. But we are treating it as what it really is, which is it is a socialist country by political administration and as well as by substance, despite its incredibly deep and at times confusing structural contradictions, which we will cover and thoroughly criticize.
Okay, y'all. We got a lot to get through here. I'm gonna keep mine. I have just a humble 9 bullet points. And when I say bullet points, I mean paragraphs. So we're gonna y'all get yourself a drink and sit down in your comfy chair, and we'll get through this together. All right, gather around, children. Okay, so to begin, I
It
want
would
to
have been such a great bit for you to say that in Chinese. By the way, before
let me
JT
just
starts,
learn how to say it in Chinese real quick.
I know that a lot of people will call us out. They're like, you're the world's most international political show, which is very true. And you usually try to invite people from particular regions to talk about those particular regions. And you're not doing this right now by not inviting a Chinese person. I am sorry, but we are all spiritually Chinese, okay?
True.
We are China maxing 24/7. So it doesn't count. Please. I don't know if I just did a racism, maybe kind of partially. Please, JT, continue.
No,
It was
not
also
at all.
that Xi Jinping refused. He had more important things to do than come on the deprogram, sadly. I know.
Plenary session.
Real revisionist hours, but
Yeah.
what can you do?
We tried. Also, it's like literally the other side of the planet, so that would be the worst thing to schedule in the world. So, but we'll get someone on eventually. Okay. I want to be clear from the start here about what kind of conversation this is, and Hakeem kind of touched on this. Because even when we say we're critiquing China from a Marxist perspective, there's still a tendency for some people to immediately like hear a liberal critique or hear a moral critique that we're making or some kind of China failed socialism narrative. But that is not what we're doing here. And I hope that'll be clear throughout the episode. But let me state this explicitly right up front because everything we say in this episode does kind of depend on this framing. So very clearly, China is a socialist state operating in what it officially describes as the primary stage of socialism. All right? That is not a vibes-based statement. It is not about our personal approval or tendency to glaze China in all things. And it's definitely not about pretending that contradictions don't exist, right? It's a structural claim grounded in Marxist-Leninist theory. So if we don't establish that baseline, then we're not doing Marxist critique. All right, all on the same page. No complaining in the comments, dear piggies.
No,
Okay.
there's gonna be some
There's
loud
gonna be a fight.
individuals.
Yeah,
it's okay.
That's all right. Have fun. Go off. Let's begin, shall we? Part 1, where state power actually resides. All right, we're gonna start with state power. Or political power, rather, because if we don't understand that, we can't understand pretty much anything else here. So in China, political power is held by the Communist Party of China. That is the CPC, not the CCP. Dear piggies, please, for the love of God, use CPC online. Don't let the chuds win, okay? I literally do think they
culture war.
I know. They say CCP because they're so stupid they think it's still the Soviet Union. That's just missing a C. Anyway.
No, they're intentionally doing it. And also it's because, well, I mean, English is the default. So, of course, it should be.
Chinese Communist Party, yes. Now, the dictatorship of the proletariat is exercised through the party as the institutional bearer of class power. There is no bourgeois electoral competition for state power. There is no legal or structural pathway for an independent capitalist class to convert economic dominance into political sovereignty. Now, this is not a minor detail, okay? In Marxist theory, the state is not neutral. It never has been. The state is an instrument of class rule. So when people ask, is China democratic? The Marxist response is not to count ballots or parties. Instead, it's to ask which class holds political power over the state apparatus.
Democratic for who?
Yeah, exactly. In China, capital does not rule the state. Capital exists, yes, obviously. Capital accumulates, yes, but capital does not command the state. It operates under party discipline, under regulation, and under conditions that are politically contingent and legally reversible. Now, that does not mean that capital has no influence. It does not mean that contradictions disappear. But it does mean the bourgeoisie does not function as a ruling class in the Marxist sense. So when we say that China is socialist, we're not saying that it has abolished commodity relations. We are saying that political sovereignty structurally excludes bourgeois class rule. And that distinction is absolutely decisive. And it's also why you see the U.S. fearmonger about, China executing billionaires every now and then. Unlike in the U.S. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's an objective difference in the relations to the means of production between the United States and China when it comes to those who hold capital. I mean, those outside of the state and its institutions.
Right.
There's a fundamental and clear difference between those relations to production, which is usually very understated. It's kind of people kind of try to sometimes treat China like it is the states but Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like unlike in the U.S., if a billionaire gets too big for his britches in China and starts trying to subvert the state for personal gain, there will actually be consequences to protect the proletariat and China's socialist development. Okay. Part 2. What socialist democracy actually means. All right. I'm going to stop doing that, but we're moving on.
Please don't keep doing it. I love it.
Now, here's where the liberal framework completely falls apart. Socialist democracy in China does not mean procedural pluralism. It does not mean rotating elite factions through electoral competition, like 4 years of Team Red, 4 years of Team Blue. It does not mean the fetishization of formal political equality while ignoring material power. Instead, socialist democracy here is defined by class content, not by form. So let's be explicit about how this democracy actually expresses itself, all right? We are talking about mass organizations. We are talking about consultative democracy. We're talking about cadre evolution and rotation. We're talking about policy experimentation, feedback loops, institutional mechanisms designed to transmit social needs upward and then adjust policy downward. All right. This is not episodic democracy where people, they raise their hands every 4 years. This is continuous democracy. It's one unified goal and, no bullshit about, it's the most important election of our lifetimes. It is just a mature project pursuing predetermined and constantly refined goals. It's not participate once every few years like the United States. It is participation embedded into governance itself. So it's about, how policy is formed, revised, corrected, evaluated over time. And crucially, democracy here is not measured by whether every opinion gets equal representation or whatever. It is measured by material outcomes. So your living standards, social stability, infrastructure, long-term planning capacity, the ability to coordinate development over decades rather than election cycles. And this is why, from a Marxist standpoint, socialist democracy in China is actually much broader, much fuller than liberal democracy. Liberal systems give you rights on paper, while capital dominates every aspect of your life. Socialist democracy constrains political forms precisely to prevent the return of bourgeois rule, and it prioritizes material reproduction of proletarian power instead. Part 3, the primary stage of socialism is not an excuse. I'm going to wake up people every time they fall asleep.
Yes.
All right. Now, I think we need to talk about the primary stage of socialism thing because this phrase is it's often misunderstood, and sometimes deliberately, and sometimes not. So the Marxist critique acknowledges uneven development. It acknowledges incomplete socialization of production. It acknowledges that commodity relations and the law of value continue to operate under party regulation. And most important is that it does not deny class contradiction, right? Class contradictions persist. The difference is that within this framework, they are understood as non-antagonistic so long as political power remains socialist. Now, this doesn't mean that they're harmless. It means that they are mediated within a socialist structure rather than exploding into open class war. Contradictions are actively identified and addressed rather than leadership simply burying their heads in the sand as in Western liberal democracies. Now, the Marxist framework is not a theoretical cop-out or whatever. We're attempting to describe reality here without pretending socialism emerges fully formed the moment power is seized. It's a process.
It is stamped by the birthmarks of the system.
Shut up, nerd. Yeah, you're right, though. And it's frustrating to see so many self-professed socialists quibbling about whether or not China's socialist. Like, if only there was a word for the transitional state between capitalism and communism. Oh well. But anyway, the primary stage of socialism thing, it's not an excuse, all right? It's an accurate analysis of the current state of affairs in China. Moving on. What are we moving on to? Part 4, historical achievements are not optional context.
Oh, I'm going to bust. I'm so close.
I know. Just wait till we get to part 13. All right. Now, before we get really critical, and I promise we will, we're not just joking the whole time, we need to ground ourselves historically. All right. The The Communist Party did not inherit a neutral society. That is not how revolutions work. It completed an anti-imperialist and anti-feudal revolution. Okay, so national sovereignty was secured after a century of foreign domination. The conditions for independent development were created. Living standards improved dramatically. Education expanded. Healthcare access expanded. Infrastructure was built. Industrial capacity developed. And critically, socialist state power was preserved under extraordinary global capitalist pressure. But here's why this matters. Socialist democracy is materially grounded. Its legitimacy is not abstract. It rests on historical outcomes and social transformation, not on procedural symbolism. And any critique that ignores this foundation, in our humble opinion, is pretty unserious.
Yeah.
Any comments, questions so far? Are we feeling good?
Only significant approval.
Oh,
Yes.
Very good. Very
I'm
good. No
nodding
dissent
approval.
allowed on my podcast. Part 5, Mao, Bureaucracy, and the
I
Cultural
promise
Revolution.
I'm clapping. I promise this is me clapping.
All right, now we get to the hard part, okay? Here we go. All right. Under the evil Mao Zedong, the party correctly identified a real and dangerous contradiction, right? Bureaucratic degeneration under socialism. This was the party, it wasn't the party being paranoid, okay? It wasn't the theoretical excess. Bureaucratic layers were forming. Hierarchies were like solidifying. The separation between administrators and the masses was becoming a real thing. So Mao's intervention was grounded in a correct insight. Class struggle does not end with the seizure of state power. Bourgeois right persists. Unequal access to authority persists. And without intervention, these tendencies can crystallize into new class relations. The Cultural Revolution was an attempt to confront that contradiction at the level of the superstructure.
Yeah.
And let me be very clear here. The diagnosis was not wrong. It exposed real contradictions. It revealed real tensions. It demonstrated that socialism is not immune to internal class struggle. But here's where the criticism starts. The execution exceeded material and institutional limits. Productive forces were not sufficiently developed. Stable mechanisms for mass supervision were lacking. Voluntarism substituted for durable structures. And the result was political rupture without structural resolution. And the consequence of that experience was not a solution to, bureaucratism and all the problems that the party correctly identified, but a deep historical trauma that most people today associate with uncontrolled mass politics, at least people in the West, broadly speaking here. And that trauma matters, right? It shapes everything that comes after. And it also colors the modern interpretation of Chinese socialism, especially among the less educated, lay people and those out to undermine socialist projects around the world. Moving on to part 6, reform and opening as socialist self-preservation. Now, as we move into everyone's favorite topic, reform and opening, we have to scrap the idea that this was simply capitalist restoration or ideological retreat. Under Deng Xiaoping, my little beautiful cowboy, the party recentered. You've seen that picture, I'm sure, right? With him wearing the cowboy. I love it. The party recentered the development of productive forces as the material basis of socialism. This was not about, loving markets or whatever liberals like to claim. It was about survival and development and sovereignty. Markets were introduced tactically. Commodity relations were permitted under regulation. The law of value was allowed to operate within constraints. But the crucial point that often gets ignored is this. Political power remained socialist. The party did not surrender control of the state. Strategic sectors remained under public control. Planning capacity was not abolished. Capital was subordinated to socialist political authority. So, in a way, China got to double dip. They were able to engage in global trade, offset some of the suspicion and hatred of capitalist states, and continue their ideological development in relative security. And this is something that the Soviet Union, unfortunately, failed to do quite as effectively. Over time, however, market mechanisms became deeply embedded. And this was not like a single decision. Nothing really ever is. It was an evolving contradiction. Pragmatism took precedence over ideological rigidity. And that brings us directly to the present. And part 7, ideological contradiction today. Now, this is where I want to be very careful and as clear as possible. Marxism-Leninism remains the official ideology of the PRC. It is institutionalized. It structures governance. It legitimizes political authority. But here's the question we have to ask. Is Marxism functioning as a living method or as administrative common sense? Because a living ideology is not ceremonial. It is critical. It investigates contradictions. It encourages debate, inquiry, mass participation. When ideology becomes primarily justificatory, when its main function is to explain why existing arrangements are correct, it risks losing its dialectical character, right? This is not about bad faith. It's about structural tendencies in large-scale governance. Administration naturally privileges expertise, stability, predictability, but socialism requires more than management. It still requires ideological struggle. Part 8, administrative overdevelopment versus mass initiative. So let me lay out the core political contradiction here. China's socialist democracy is substantively deeper than liberal democracy in class content, in material outcomes, and in long-term planning capacity. But it faces the danger of administrative overdevelopment relative to mass political initiative. All right, so what does that mean in normal people words? Well, the party is indispensable. There is no socialist alternative that bypasses it. But as governance becomes more complex, the relationship between the party and the masses becomes increasingly mediated through professional layers. The mass line risks becoming consultation rather than active supervision. Cadre evaluation systems matter, right? Like feedback mechanisms matter, but they do not always substitute for sustained, organized involvement of workers and communities in decisions over production, distribution, and local governance. So the key tension is this. Stability is rational, right? It is historically justified. But stability can harden into risk aversion. And risk aversion can limit experimentation in democratic forms that could deepen socialist legitimacy from below.
Especially when there's some stability, some continuous form of stability that is like acceptable to the status quo. That
right.
You don't want to rock the boat, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not a contradiction between like authoritarianism and democracy. That's a
We're
liberal
adults
framing.
here. We don't discuss these in these terms.
Yeah, we're putting the liberal in the wall. We're spackling over the holes the liberal has peeking his head through. The real contradiction here is between administrative order and class self-activity. All right. We're coming to the end here, friends, of my little intro. And that is part 9, billionaires as a socialist contradiction. So let's deal with that, the arguably most controversial issue. The existence of billionaires in China is not in itself evidence of capitalist class rule. Their wealth is politically contingent, right? It is legally revocable. What power they do wield can easily be yoinked. They do not control the state. They do not command strategic sectors independently. They do not exercise sovereign political power.
And this we see on a regular basis.
Yes.
Like the basically expropriation or the governmental recommendation of them giving up their like these. Like you see this often and in extensive terms, and they shut the fuck up and take it. They just like these are Peter Thiel, like, you know, Elon Musk types in wealth and influence if they were in the West, and they just shut the fuck up and take it. There is like there's a beauty to. Like if that does not make you understand which class is actually in power, keep going again.
You're completely right. I mean, if you contrast that, like you said, take Musk, who has gutted the American state, directly led to the firing of hundreds of thousands of state workers.
He's not even American.
He's not. He 95% of space launches are now through his private company, SpaceX, which is directly funded by the government because he says give money. That is the key difference there. Like that's billionaires in China operate on a completely different, under a completely different set of rules that would never be allowed, even the tiniest bit of control, like what Elon tries to do on a daily basis. But anyway, and this is where Marxists have to be honest here. The existence of billionaires is a contradiction. Extreme private wealth reproduces bourgeois social relations in everyday life, right? It shapes aspirations among normal people. It shapes consumption. It shapes informal hierarchies of status and prestige. These are just facts, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want billionaires in socialism, right? That is the end goal. We don't want that. The party, however, has demonstrated its capacity to discipline capital through regulation, anti-corruption campaigns, and intervention, but these actions often appear, at least from the outside, reactive rather than structurally preventative. And that matters ideologically, right? So from a Marxist-Leninist standpoint, the danger posed by billionaires is not that they secretly run the country. It's not like capitalism with a mask, right? It's the danger is that their tolerated existence blurs the line between socialist accumulation and personal enrichment. It can shape popular perceptions of success. It can distort class education. And it can slow the development of social norms appropriate to a higher stage of socialism, which is what China's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
The unresolved question is not whether China is socialist today. The question is how long this extreme private wealth can be accommodated without deeper mechanisms of socialization, redistribution, and public accountability. And speaking for myself here, I think I would be more concerned if the very wealthy in China didn't routinely face the consequences that they do. I think the fact that we do see billionaires jailed or even executed occasionally speaks to the fact that the party is aware of the risk and they're currently trying to moderate it while reaping the benefits as long as possible. And that's, I think that's just a common sense approach, and it's everything is a process. But in closing, what Marxist critique actually demands.
Oh, yes.
So let me go back to the starting point here to close out my section. A Marxist critique of the People's Republic of China does not deny its socialist character, right? We have said multiple times already, our critique insists on China's socialist character. And therefore insists on naming its contradictions clearly and honestly, right? We're just doing our best here to adequately and accurately analyze the current state of affairs in socialist China. Socialism is not a finished model. It is a process shaped by history, by material limits, and by class struggle. If that process is going to move forward rather than ossify, socialist democracy must continue to deepen, not just administratively, but through renewed mass initiative and ideological vitality. And here at the Deprogram, we are doing our best to ensure that Xi Jinping understands what must be done.
Exactly right, yes. It is us and some white guy from Wisconsin that has recently read the CPI Maoist pamphlet, 14-page pamphlet on why China...
I am a China expert now.
Exactly right. Suck it, 96 million fucking Communist Party members, suck it. All right. Okay, so the only Chinese words I know is orange chicken. I think I'm teasing, of course. All right. My section is more on the political economy and class dynamics side. And then I'm going to go into the is China imperialist discussion and criticize that, both the position as well as the deficiencies of the Chinese, both Belt and Road and their foreign investment and stuff like that. By the way, I want everybody to know that when we started this podcast, the cardinal founding rule of this podcast was we will not talk about China.
Here we are, 4-part original series. Later.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so China's political economy, both in form and in structure, remains socialist, according to the lines that JT mentioned. It does so through the dominant public ownership in the commanding heights of the economy, so strategic sectors. This means state monopolies over land, finance, banking, the political subordination of private capital that JT mentioned. The fact that a market economy exists is, of course, problematic in ways that I'm going to get into, but it functions not as the determinant of class power in itself, but as a regulated mechanism through which the law of value operates under planned parameters. So that means there are government instated and developed forms of economic planning through which the market is in certain specific ways limited and guided. To give the perfect example, houses are for living in, not speculation. That would never in a billion years happen in Germany, in Britain, or for sure in the States. Yeah. But that was something that destroyed a several tens of billions of dollars worth industry and financial bubble in China. It was, by the way, not so much destroyed as expertly deflated in a way that would cause the least possible damage to the Chinese economy. In fact, it benefited it. That is a sort of like economic and political finesse and expertise that does not get the respect, honestly, that it deserves. The Soviets couldn't fucking do this for ways. I'm going to get into it in a bit. But anyways, that's what I mean by the law of value operates within planned parameters. These are regulated mechanisms. When we talk about accumulation under socialism, we mean, for example, not only primitive accumulation, meaning the prerequisites for industrialization that happened through the 40s, into the revolution, and subsequently in the 50s and 60s and so on. Not only that, but we mean in the modern day, accumulation under the socialist character or action, let's say, of China is directed towards, first and foremost, expanded reproduction of the means of the general means of production, social reproduction, I mean, and national development, meaning that surplus extraction is mediated by the state rather than by an autonomous group of bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie as a whole. Right. This is another significant difference that does not exist comparative to quote-unquote capitalist countries. This has enabled China to create large-scale redistribution of this surplus, particularly directed towards poverty eradication, the many hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty, but at what cost, of course, while still preserving the planning capacity, this long-term planning capacity that is, in essence, structurally impossible under capitalism. With all that being said, though, China is still, as JT mentioned, in the primary stage of socialism, and that necessarily produces a differentiated class structure. That means that while the proletariat retains political dominance economically and politically through the Communist Party, it doesn't uniformly exercise power, particularly at the point of production. What I mean by that is that the working class does not directly lay their hands on all modes of social reproduction. There is not cooperatives in every enterprise in China. That also has its shortcomings, by the way. So it is both a criticism and a not commendation, I don't think that's a word, but it's both a positive and a negative thing for the Chinese, which we'll touch on as well. Along with the working class that exists within China, the proletariat, there is also, as JT mentioned, this managerial strata, technocratic, I guess, strata. You have these middle managers, professional middle managers, certain politically subordinated private entrepreneurs. These are not separate classes per se, aside from the private entrepreneurs of a certain wealth level and ownership level. For the most part, the rest of them kind of hover in and around the proletariat, but their connections are lessened. The fundamental difference, though, is that these different stratums lack hegemonic capacity. They do not command state power in any meaningful way. Right? They can have material influence, ideological influence on economy and society, but this differentiation, this class differentiation resulting from the primary stage of socialism reflects this incomplete socialization of production, which means that instead of there being like the common meme, I guess, that there's a capitalist restoration, no, there are necessary contradictions and shortcomings of the primary stage of socialism that results in a differentiation of classes that exists, the proletariat still being dominant through their political leadership, but because of these subsequent groupings that exist, private entrepreneurs, managerial strata, and so on and so forth, that do not have different relations to the means of production, mind you. So they do not exert political power in that way, but they do exist. That generates real tensions that require, let's say, political management, ongoing political management, at least thus far. There's other segments to this, right? A working class needs trade unions to, I guess, organize and agitate for their interests. Under capitalism. Under socialism, they play a different role. We discussed this prior, but trade unions generally in socialist countries, but particularly in China, are integrated into the socialist state apparatus. This means that they play more of a stabilizing role for the working class under a socialist government by preventing antagonistic class struggle that would be disruptive to the current process of accumulation, socialist accumulation, economic accumulation, I mean. But this integration means that unions end up being more administrative instead of militant. So that limits their capacity to function as direct organs of worker self-activity. Now, these are theoretical disputes or points, but they are nonetheless still important, because this kind of like ties into the subsequent point that a term that the Western Marxists love is shop floor democracy. What they mean is direct like cooperative management of enterprises, where the workers run their affairs directly, like not through some state institution that manages things or local councils, but specifically, per enterprise basis, the workers decide what to produce, how much to produce, and whatnot. This shop floor democracy is relatively uneven in China and generally weak, or very often weak. That means that workers usually, like the proletariat, experiences socialism more as policy implementation by the state instead of as like collective power. That's not 100% always. There is a culture of socialism that exists in China. It is diffused through society through superstructural mechanisms. I mean, through education, through general culture, and so on and so forth. But the direct material experience of administering socialism is lacking. And this means that the risk is not bourgeois class rule, but instead the transformation of workers into more like administered objects or subjects instead of active subjects of socialist construction, active makers of their history, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That being said, by the way, there are cooperative enterprises that are massive. Huawei is an example, which I believe is, if it's not the largest in the world, it's the largest in China or something, and it's massively successful. But that's one, I guess, like positive example. There's many negative examples of that, where they aren't cooperative in that way. And of course, again, we'll get into it at a later point, but cooperatives are not the end-all and be-all of socialism. In fact, sometimes they can be damaging to socialism, depending on how they're instituted. We've covered this before, but we will continue. All right. Now, currently, the contradictions that we see in Chinese development are not those of a capitalist system. They do not reflect a generalized crisis of overaccumulation, like you see in the United States, for example, the boom and bust cycles. I mean, you do not see the declining profitability characteristic of mature capitalism, not in the same way, at least. Instead, you have the uneven nature, the stage, like step-by-step nature of socialist construction across this huge society, internally differentiated and large geographically. I mean, society. You have regional disparities. You have sectoral imbalances. I mean, agricultural versus, for example, industrial, and between different industrial sectors, between academic and educational sectors, so on and so forth. Generational pressures from previous, I guess, political setups that existed and economic setups that existed. But the difference is that all of these regional disparities, imbalances between different economic sectors, and so on and so forth, they are actively managed through, first of all, economic and political planning. They're managed through directed political decisions that allow for fiscal transfers, that outline industrial policy, that create the infrastructure and the plan for long-term coordination instead of basically just market anarchy like exists in the States. One perfect example is the soybean industry in the States, which from literally week to week, it's either like, oh my gosh, it's a boom, bull market. We're doing the best ever. So I'm going to fucking lose everything by whether Trump decides to tweet on tariffs or not, right? That is a fundamental difference between how the Chinese socialist system exists and the American capitalist system. Of course, there are certain problematic phenomena in China: youth employment pressures, regional unevenness, political and economic development regionally. I mean, these are not crises of capitalism, like directed capitalist uneven development. They are more appropriately phenomena of transitional dislocations that exist. Think about it like this: when you have a nation that's so large and so different internally, or differentiated is a better term, that develops at such a rapid structural upgrading, educational expansion, the deliberate politically driven transformation of labor processes towards higher productivity, more technological sophistication, and so on and so forth, then of course you're going to have these problematic issues, like, for example, youth employment pressures or regional disparities. But this is as a result of this rapid development that's state-directed in a socialist system, not a result of like the production of a surplus population that's driven by capitalist accumulation that's closing commons and forcing people into. You understand understand the point that I'm getting at. Now, currently, socialist planning capacity is driven by technological development and the current digitalization. I mean, like computers, supercomputers, AI, and so on and so forth. But they're still fairly rudimentary. Like there is planning, but it's not the Cybersyn 2 what we're hoping for, right? Yeah. Which is a huge point of criticism of China. But they have the reasoning for this, which we'll hopefully touch on. But these function as extensions of socialist planning capacity, as I mentioned. There's advances in data infrastructure, digital coordination. There is real-time feedback from like the peripheries or particular like industrial sectors to enhance macro-level planning and micro-level planning. There's strategic foresight that this information allows for, and policy responsiveness that exists through this economic planning that is either unavailable or impossible under capitalist states. The United States, which is a highly developed country, like for all intents, for all our memeing, has an incredibly highly developed economic and technological power, but they lack this capacity entirely. And there's a material reason for this, a political and material reason for this. That being said, though, as you may imagine, there are difficulties that come, administrative and technical difficulties that reflect the material requirements of governing such a complex socialist economy at such a large scale, over such a large population, over such a large landmass area. Now, the tools, these digitalization tools and whatnot, can help stabilize different contradictions that exist in society by predicting them and analyzing them appropriately with enough data. They can improve economic coordination, but they are not a substitute for political legitimacy of the Chinese government through or derived from mass participation. Does this point make sense?
Absolutely.
For the Chinese, without conscious alignment with mass line principles, which is a foundational principle of the Chinese government, technical governance, despite bringing economic benefits long-term, risks depoliticizing socialism by, number one, distancing or divorcing itself from the wide mass of people, from the proletariat particularly, but also allied classes that exist in China, and also by resolving contradictions not through like lively political debate and engagement, but through administrative, strokes of the pen. This is not proletarian self-activity realizing and correcting contradictions. It is a administrative clerical thing. So what that means is, and subsequently, like the end of the criticism of this part is, the central, economic task that the Chinese have, I would say, in my humble opinion, and I'm in no way worthy to make this fucking statement, but I will nonetheless say it. The central economic task for them is not to resolve antagonistic contradictions that exist in China between, for example, accumulation, economic accumulation, and social reproduction. Particularly, that is a contradiction, but that it would not be the primary one for them. It is the continued political alignment of this technical governance that China has so painstakingly and expertly developed with socialist democracy, mass participation, which does exist to a certain level, but not necessarily expansive enough, I would say, particularly on the enterprise side of things. Now, how you square this circle and how you can bring such a huge and diverse nation together, that is a question that I lack the administrative capacity to give you a direct and easy answer for. What I can say is that more advances in the productive forces, improvement in the means of production, should be consciously integrated into active working class leadership. There should be mass participation in this expansion of the productive forces so that the working class, of the mass of the Chinese working class, feels themselves related to this political growth, economic and political growth, instead of being treated as, subject of these autonomous managerial domains. This is kind of a much more nuanced and developed form. Yes, I'm stroking my hog here. Nuanced and developed form of the over-bureaucratization argument that has historically existed, but is so frequently fragile and inadequate and wrongly stated and developed. This is a parallel thought, but I would say much more concretely well developed. And this is not me saying this specifically. This is any Marxist who has actually done the research and read into this. The real ones, not my little 14 group fucking Communist Party in Belgium, which lives in the People's Republic of Wallonia or whatever the fuck, which doesn't even have fucking subsidized milk for babies, let alone
savage. Jesus, he's already dead.
Yeah, I know. But that's kind of the point. That there is some substance to the over bureaucratization, but it's more of administrative criticism rather than the fundamental class relations have changed, the relations of production have changed. Now, there's more economic criticism that I can deliver here, and this is kind of building on what JT said, and it's the integration of private capital, specifically into socialist accumulation, even though it's politically constrained in China, creates differentiated or diverse material incentives and interests that need constant supervision, obviously, right? Not only political supervision, but also active, surveillance in particular ways. Now, the pressures that exist because of the integration of private capital into socialist accumulation, the pressures are not always counterbalanced, let's say, by equally developed mechanisms of worker control, democratic planning, particularly at the enterprise level. So what you end up happening, instead of like capitalist crises that exist in the States, you have a lag, a structural or time lag in where the working class in China would govern politically, but without consistently managing to exercise their power at the point of production, right? I'm almost repeating myself, but not really. I'm trying to kind of give the background, right? This is kind of the over-reliance of administrative coordination, like the party will solve it, is the idea that we want to get past, if you understand what I mean, right? So the subsequent relation is not only efficiency or growth. The economic challenge is not just to maximize efficiency, but also deepening socialist relations of production so that you end up more, I guess, proletarian in the expansion of this aggregate capacity for production. And this is kind of interesting because when you read what the Chinese say themselves, this is actually this is their criticism. They're like, the primary contradiction in China is the regional disparities that we have, so on and so forth. We need to raise the economic, the general level of economic existence in China, make it more even and reduce wealth inequality and whatnot. And subsequently, their B point, their subpoint or subtext to this as well is that they would like to increase this conscious or this deepening of socialist relations of production to create this, what they would refer to as a moderately prosperous socialist society, socialist in content, economic, political, social content, even on like a philosophical level. When you have this continued reliance on market mechanisms, of course, across large parts of the economy, you create fragmented labor relations, you create uneven bargaining power for workers depending on if they're in migrant labor systems. Subcontracting chains can result in, again, uneven bargaining power and other issues. Private sector employments usually operate with weak generally worker participation, limited militancy of any unions or engagement in union activities. And this can also limit, I guess, the imagination and aspirations of workers in their capacity to shape production directly. So that's one of the central internal contradictions to try to deepen these socialist relations of production, which is, again, much harder said than done because there are tens of millions, if not at this point billions, of enterprises in China. Right. This is not the swipe of a pen. Okay, now everybody will like this needs to be done stepwise, gradually, through like overarching economic plans of slow development. And that is exactly what the Chinese have been doing from the 1990s until now, or at least the early 2000s until now. There has been a significant shift in the economic makeup and structure of China, which is incredible but today's not the China glazing episode. Today is the nuanced Marxist criticism episode. So we'll continue going. The question of imperialism in China. If you want to assess or ask, is China imperialist, then you need to, of course, define the Marxist, political economic definition of imperialism. It's not the function of a size or strength of an economy or the trade volume of it or its global presence. Imperialism is a structural position. It's characterized by dominance of monopoly finance capital, the export of capital as a systemic and systematic necessity of capitalist expansion and accumulation, and the ongoing appropriation of surplus value from dependent regions, no matter how they exist, through unequal exchange, through profit repatriation, through debt regimes, through intellectual property monopolies and other forms of monopolies, through coercive or military enforcement of market access. The imperial core and imperialist countries within the imperial core increasingly live off of surplus extracted from the periphery. China, number one, does not exist in this pathway and did not rise through this pathway. China emerged from the opposite condition. It existed in semi-colonial subjugation, forced market opening through military means, territorial fragmentation, underdevelopment imposed by Western imperialism, Japanese imperialism, and so on and so forth. And it was the communist revolution that constituted an anti-imperialist rupture. It dismantled comprador capital and foreign bourgeois capital existence. It secured national and economic sovereignty in China. It subordinated accumulation to the socialist state to socialist state power instead of to profits for foreign capitalists or even comprador domestic capitalists. Imperialist economies, on the other hand, developed through outward economic expansion and domination. We're not talking about military. We're talking about specifically economic. China's development, on the opposite, historically and even up to today, has been overwhelmingly inward oriented. It's focused on rebuilding productive capacity after centuries of imperial plunder and humiliation. That's not a political point or a rhetoric point. That is a historical fact. The trajectory of China as it exists today is that of a formerly colonized society that's breaking its dependency and not of a core imperial and economic power constructing global extraction networks. Is this clear so far?
I think China's imperialist, actually, so let's wrap it up.
All right, there we go. I mean, it would be easier. I will not have to go through the... It's okay. We'll try to limit it to 1 more hour. Okay, look. China's integration currently into the world economy, particularly during the reform period, reinforces this position. For decades, China functioned primarily as a site of low-margin manufacturing, with Western-dominated global value chains taking over, basically. Chinese labor generated enormous value for them, while monopoly firms in the imperial core captured a disproportionate amount of profits or surplus through control of finance, branding, logistics, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. So surplus value flowed outwards to the rest of the world, particularly the industrialized imperial West, rather than inwards. Even large trade surpluses that existed were largely recycled into U.S., for example, financial instruments. So that means that anything that was supposed to stabilize or help China was effectively used to stabilize instead Western consumption and the financial system that exists in the West. And this is a pattern that reflects China's existence as through peripheral value transfer into the imperial core rather than imperialist super profit extraction as a imperialist power. Imperialist economies generally, take a look at the United States for example, they're defined by persistent net inflows of global surplus. China's historic pattern, as well as modern day pattern, has been the reverse: a large-scale domestic labor, mobilization, you could say, compressed wages, thin industrial margins for China, and outward surplus leakage, you could say, both in labor as well as in labor hours and in surplus. And now, while China at the current day invests abroad, this investment is fundamentally different from imperial finance capital. First and foremost, it's concentrated in infrastructure. It's directed towards productive capacity. They're or directed towards long-term development instead of speculative flows, privatization, or rent-seeking monopolies, which are so common for Western forms of investment. So these investments do not constitute a systemic drain of surplus into a Chinese financial core. And to zoom out even more, the answer to the question of Chinese imperialism, or if China is China imperialist, lies in the absence of bourgeois class rule in China. Imperialism requires a ruling capitalist class whose accumulation imperatives, specifically, drive state policy outwards, like the American example. I use the American example because it is the hegemon, not for any other reason. Particularly, it's the clearest example to have. You could use Britain, for example, if you want to, particularly historically, but even to the modern day, right? Imperialism, I'll repeat, requires a ruling capitalist class whose own imperatives for accumulation drive state policy, national state policy, outwards. In China, as JT so beautifully mentioned, land, finance, strategic industries, they remain under state control. Private capital operates within strict political limits. Billionaires exist, but their necks are short. their wealth is contingent. It's revocable. It's subordinate to party authority. They don't command the state. They don't dictate foreign policy. They don't autonomously export capital as a systemic or systematic necessity. Without any sovereign monopoly capital that can dominate political power, the heart, the economic engine of imperialism does not and cannot exist. Now, that does not mean that there are no shortcomings with Chinese foreign investment. I'm going to get into that. But China's currently growing global influence primarily weakens the existing imperial hierarchy, the primary contradiction internationally, which is Western, but specifically American imperialism. It challenges dollar hegemony. It offers alternatives to IMF austerity. It rejects or tries to abate or limit regime change politics to the extent that it can be mobilized to, but just solely on economic basis. I mean. Now, this does not mean that or automatically generate socialism internationally. And for the most part, it's still kind of like, high-level Chinese government driven. This is not like the Chinese masses delivering this. But it does fracture imperial mechanisms instead of managing them or recuperating them or sorting them out and incorporating them into Chinese ones. All of this kind of reinforces the point that China has not fully exited the world capitalist system because it can't. It remains deeply entangled in these global markets. It's vulnerable to financial pressure, and China is internally shaped by the contradictions of the stage of socialism which it finds itself in, the primary stage of socialism, which is operating within a capitalist world economy. This uneven development that exists within China, reliance on exports, that's kind of lessening nowadays, but it still exists, ongoing market mechanisms, so on and so forth. This is reflecting a society and a economy that is overcoming the legacy of centuries of underdevelopment instead of one that has achieved the surplus extracting position of the imperial core. So structurally, China occupies a transitional position. It is a former semi-colony that has broken many dependency chains, but has not transformed into an imperial center of global accumulation. And this is a mathematical reality, as much as some people would like to pretend that China is imperialist by, silly number games that they try to do. The actual math, when you look at unequal exchange on paper, value transference on paper, the commodity chains that exist in China and linkages across the world to other economic sectors, China is a net. What is the English word? Not extract. It is having net being extracted out of. My English is broken. You understand what I'm trying to say? Mm-hmm. It's not extracting out of others, and this is the mathematical truth. Labeling China as imperialist kind of collapses Marxism into like the surface geopolitics, where you think power means exploitation, or having some influence means imperialism or something. By that logic, any large or successful country becomes imperialist by default, which is a stupid thought. It strips the concept of its material meaning. So if you want to carry out a rigorous Marxist analysis instead, that shows that imperialism is about who extracts surplus, how class power is organized globally, so on and so forth. Through these criteria, China, as I mentioned, remains outside the imperial core and is much closer to the historic imperial periphery, but it's one that's led by a socialist state that has dramatically improved its position within the capitalist system so far. Hugo, do you want to take your bit?
Okay, so what if the most dangerous thing China is doing to U.S. power right now isn't building warships or hacking servers, but quietly breaking the monopoly the imperial core has on how the world develops, borrows, and imagines its future? Because if we take Marxism seriously, we have to start from the structure of the world system, not from just vibes on who is red and who is purple and who is blue. And structurally, as we've covered multiple times here, I just want to confirm on my end, the People's Republic of China today occupies an objectively anti-imperialist position, while at the same time being riddled with contradictions that no honest socialist can just hand wave away. Both of these things can be true at the same time, and if we drop either side, we slide into liberal moralism on one hand, or just, as Hakim said, campist apologetics on the other. So let's set some definitions for my part. Imperialism isn't just a big country being mean, as Hakim said. It's a specific configuration where a core of wealthy states led by the US and backed by NATO in this, current version of planet Earth, together with the IMF, the World Bank, extract value from the rest of the planet via finance, technology, and coercion. In that architecture, Washington controls the dollar system, writes the rules of trade, policies, sea lanes, and reserves for itself the right to decide which governments are legitimate and which can be sanctioned, overthrown, or blockaded. China does not sit in that core. As we've learned, it's a former semi-colonial country that fought its way out of direct imperial control, built its own industrial base, and still operates largely outside the formal command structures of Western finance and military power. It doesn't run the IMF. It doesn't dictate structural adjustment programs. It doesn't anchor NATO. Its currency is not the global reserve. When China expands South-South trade, launches alternative financing mechanisms, and backs new institutions like the BRICS New Development Bank, it chips away at the monopoly the U.S. has on global accumulation. When a global South government can say if the IMF will not finance the sport, China might, the whole bargaining position of that country changes. You get maneuvering room, limited but nonetheless real. And this is why sections of the socialist movement argue that China's rise marks a qualitative change in the structure of world power, not because Beijing is building world socialism, but because a socialist-led state is helping to redistribute power away from a single imperial pole towards a system of multiple centers of decision-making. That very redistribution weakens U.S. hegemony and the enforcement mechanisms that defend it, like sanctions, coups, proxy wars. Hakim mentioned all of them, not to repeat. So, on top of that, China's official foreign policy doctrine centers on sovereignty and non-interference. The famous, for those of you who do not know, 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which are mutual respect for territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference, equality, and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. In practice, that means that Beijing does not organize color revolutions, does not invade countries on humanitarian pretexts, and consistently opposes regime change operations at the UN, including the ones enthusiastically championed by liberal democracies that think that, a people of a nation deserve to make their choice, even though people that don't belong to that nation are supposedly supposed to make choices for them. But yes, is this decision that Chinese leaders make uniquely, I don't know, fucking virtuous? No, this is fucking get out of here with that liberalism, okay? It's because they know that the same playbook used against Iraq, Libya, or Yugoslavia could be used against them. Defending the sovereignty of the global south is simultaneously defending the political space for their own socialist experiment to survive. So if we're doing materialist analysis, we have to say it very clearly. China's global role objectively weakens U.S. unipolar dominance, expands policy space for developing nations, and rejects regime change and militarized coercion as the primary tools of international order, bringing international order potentially to the scene. That is anti-imperialist in content, even if it's carried out through, very, how should I say this, cautious, bureaucratic, let's say very non-romantic, dry diplomacy. But here's where, our side often gets confused. There's this temptation to slide into some sort of binary. Either you cheerlead multipolarity as if it's already socialism, usually done by people from the developing world, or you dismiss it as just, inter-imperialist rivalry, usually done by Westerners, hiding a slight level of chauvinism. Like, okay, if there's supposed to be a big boss, it's preferable if the big boss is Washington because he's more civilized than the Orientals. But both inherently, let's be honest, slightly biased and lacking responsibility. One much worse than the other one, in my modest opinion. But again, I'm showing my subjectivity of not being, for now, at least, from the imperial core. Multipolarity simply means that, for those of you who somehow listen to the show and don't understand, it means that there isn't one global center of command anymore. The fusion creates conditions for socialism, but it doesn't deliver any outcome automatically. On the one hand, the rise of China and BRICS opens doors. Governments can seek finance without accepting IMF austerity as a fucking condition. Countries can trade in currencies other than the USD, making them slightly less vulnerable to U.S. sanctions and regional blocs, and they can negotiate with multiple powers and extract better terms for infrastructure, technology, resource management. It's to say it in as lived up of a way as I can. Boy, this is just like from almost every perspective very fucking good. It's let's call it democratization of diplomacy, where you actually have choices. Aren't you like? Isn't that what the fucking brother? Like the democratic world order perspective. Isn't that what it's supposed to be about? Like every nation state, no matter how large or small, having the choice to direct its own destiny, both economically and when it comes to expressing their own sovereignty, or even the opposite for potentially uniting with other nations, etc., etc. Isn't that the point? Well, through the removal of unipolarity, you can actually take that written on paper and actually execute it. Yes, Kekil, apologies.
No, it's such a good point, but I just wanted to mention the historical parallel, just so people realize. The last time there was a multipolar world, I mean the existence of the Soviet Union and the United States as the two poles for the most part. The third pole would, I guess you could say, the unaligned movement. That result, particularly the existence of the Soviet Union, that allowed this multipolarity to exist in the 20th century, also allowed for the independence of every single colony that had been colonized for centuries up until that point. Political independence, real political independence. Economic independence, that's something that comes subsequently. It even allowed for the socialist transition of dozens of countries across the world. Like, this is...
Yes.
Like the significance of this is so, like, people take it as almost as if it was a predetermined script. Of course, independence was gonna come after the end of World War II. No, independence came because the Soviet Union emerged victorious. That's why they had the weight, they had the balls that they could let hang, right? Which allowed them or gave these nations and these colonial subjects not only the courage but also the understanding, the diplomatic cover, the military support at times, as well as economic, for their fight for their own liberation from slavery and from the imperial metropole. That is fucking ridiculous, and that is the kind of, that's why we advocate for multipolarity. So go on.
Yes, the brilliant historical context. Like if you advocate for socialism, multipolarity is good. If you advocate for national liberation, multipolarity is good. If you advocate for sovereignty without having nukes, bro, multipolarity is good. If you advocate for everybody gets a fucking nuke, multipolarity is good. If you argue for denuclearization because you no longer have one guy that cannot be policed by multiple other states, multipolarity is good. There is unless you are an American not an American, unless you're a very large capitalist that does not have very large amounts of capital tied in the United States economy, this is good for you. I genuinely fail to comprehend an alternative perspective that is not just jingoism.
That being Exactly right. That being said, just to reemphasize something you said, multipolarity is good, but it's not socialism. Then again, metastasis in regress is good. I mean, it's not remission, but it's better than, you understand my point. Please go on, you.
Yes, exactly. It does not guarantee socialist transformation. It is a terrain of struggle. Not a substitute for struggle. We're changing, you're watching those medieval European movies, and then one great general is like, oh man, we're gonna wait on top of the hill, and then even though the other guys have the same size of an army or even a larger one, the guys are on top of the hill, so it's easier to aim the bows. Now some historians are gonna fucking murder me probably. It's something completely different. But the terrain changing changes everything from for the army, in this case, in this allegory, defending, or in our case, for a movement that is trying to advocate for a particular change in mode of production, aka an alternative system. It gives us more room to breathe, let's say, more space to fight. But, someone still has to fight. Key point there. Without conscious class and political intervention, the most likely outcome is not global liberation, but just, a rebalanced capitalism with new centers and new peripheries. And we have to mention that is a potential contradiction that could grow. The Chinese leadership, at least on paper and in rhetoric, repeatedly promises that it does not seek hegemony and systemically opposes it. Whether that will turn out to be true or not, only history can say. For now, what we can see is that they've been seeking partners, not slaves. We can use the Belt and Road Initiative as an example, no matter how complex it is and is not perfect. We have a whole fucking episode on it. If you're new here, go watch that. But if you're very lazy, basically BRI is China's massive, still evolving infrastructure-led development project. Think ports, railways, energy corridors, fiber optic cables, I don't know, fucking industrial zones the size of the entire city that I live in, fucking connecting Asia and Africa and Latin America and even parts of based Europe and shit, in a world where development has usually meant banks just getting fucking rich. That's it. The way the Chinese do business represents a major rupture. IMF loans always arrive with all the brutal conditions you probably know of. Privatization of public services, cuts to wages and subsidies, trade and capital, hardcore liberalization, fucking Ancapistan everywhere. All justified in the name, of stabilization. We have to consider you a stable country to give you money. And by stable, I mean we just literally take all your copper. China's offer exists in a stark fucking contrast, and not only what I said earlier in rhetoric, but if we look at the Belt and Road Initiative, also in practice. They give long-term loans for specific infrastructure projects. Okay? They do continuous, so many fucking times, loan forgiveness. They negotiate state to state, often aligned with recipients' countries' own development plans. They go and they're like, what are you doing right now? Can we make sure that happens? And you give us something in return. Officially, no political strings in terms of regime change or meddling in the domestic economic system of the country. From the standpoint of many global South, nations, this is literally a lifeline. But more importantly, a real alternative to the we will save you, but you become our bitch type of economic warfare capitalist states wage. At the same time, serious left critiques point to some of the contradictions. BRI deals are negotiated, kind of overwhelmingly through national elites. You can think heads of state, finance ministers, and even local, very, very large capitalists. While labor unions, peasant organizations, depending on the level of industrialization of a particular state, and even like popular, let's say, alternative movements in any country you can think of, are rarely central actors that are even sometimes, unfortunately, reached out to by the Chinese. In some cases, projects even heavily rely on, just importing Chinese labor. And I find this particular criticism out of everything that we've kind of covered today, even though I'm also going to go back on it, kind of very strong. Because, China unironically does hold almost all the cards when negotiating these massive deals with local power brokers, right? Yeah. If they demanded socialist reforms in return for loans, they could see real change. Mm-hmm. This, though, as we've learned and will continue to learn, would very much so go against their own policy of, not wanting to become the red IMF, if you know what I mean. As funny as that alternative reality might sound. Whether
this
is
universally attractive. That's the point.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Whether this is, long-term, very, very wise dialectical planning, where, the idea is that the local state will develop at its own pace towards a class-conscious society now that it has been aided in industrialization by the People's Republic of China. Or, we are saying it's a cautious episode. We're trying to, devil's advocate all the time. Or maybe it's just a classic, I just can't fucking be asked being done by the Chinese. It's not our fucking job to, fix everyone type of perspective. We will see. It's most likely, in my opinion, kind of a combination of the both. But for Marxists, that's kind of the contradiction. Development without transformation, anti-imperialism without, putting internationalism at the front. It's a huge improvement over, structural adjustment, but it's not yet, you cannot call, and I don't think anybody is, but I'm still fighting ghosts. You cannot call oh my God, BRI is this global socialist project, etc., etc. I would rather call it a global level up project for the so-called global South.
Yeah, I will say one little pointer on the why doesn't China export revolutions, even though I wish they would, and you can't really export revolution, you understand what I mean, but I mean greatly support politically, economically, militarily.
Sometimes it's even reactionary. It's
exactly right. But why doesn't it do that? And I'll share with you some Chinese wisdom. An egg cracked from the outside is food. An egg that cracks from the inside is a new life. That's the
fine boom.
That's the
yes.
Which some people might find as a tired kind of just. But I find I in the general historical overview of revolutions, that tends to be the case. You can compare.
Does. We got some hate, and keep this in the episode when we had the brilliant Diego Ruzarin, and he said when he interviewed not interview, but he was actually in China and asked a Chinese politician, "Why are you?" not constantly fucking intervening everywhere, etc., etc. Yeah. A lot of comments were that wasn't necessarily profound. And then the pitch underneath, with all due respect, it's fine criticism and enjoy it. You have every right to it, right? But then the explanation of why is because, I don't know, Big Brother must save me. Which is, I'm sorry, but now I'm going to do a little bit of chauvinism. That's very fucking Western perspective, bro.
Yeah.
Unironically, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What the fuck are you talking about? Obviously, I'm jesting here, but you know the point that I'm trying to make.
A couple of just small points. Hugo's delivery is, as always, so fucking beautiful and deep and thorough and throbbing. But there's just a few individual points, and there's the projects that China delivers, General FDI and so on and so forth. They are state-to-state channel mediated. They're between local elites and the Chinese government. There's very little involvement of workers or popular organizations, and this results in this top-down, development of improved infrastructure, but social relations are not directly affected. And that's exactly what Hugo said. This is intentional because they don't want to politically involve or interfere in that way. Now, sure, that's kind of cool for them, but also at the same time, socialism is not when you have nicer trade deals, right? Socialism is more complex than that. But the reason that China has this cautious non-interference strategy is to their own benefit, but it also limits. Oh my God, my cat is jumping on my.
Yes.
Sorry. I don't know if you heard that. I was like,
the cat heard we're criticizing China and lost its shit. It's like what
no.
the fuck?
Oh
What the fuck you saying?
Exactly.
How, motherfucker? Cow!
No. Yes, oh my God, you're so cute.
Why don't you talk to me like that?
Oh, yeah, sorry. He was sleeping on the mattress behind in the cutest sausaged way. Yes, by the way, I'm not misgendering my cat. I have had 2 cats, one of which is with another family member, and this is our other cat. So yes, and he is now sitting in my lap so cutely.
2 cats.
Oh,
Bourgeois
Habibi,
decadence.
Habibi, and it is Habibi. Oh my gosh, he's so cute. I gotta record. What are you doing? Oh my God. Okay, you can have some ASMR of me petting him.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Premium content.
Right. Hold on.
Marco Jack, premium content. Keep
Yes.
that in for the Balkan people in chat. Marco Jack, premium content. Sorry, please.
All right. So what I'm trying to mention to you really before my lovely cat decided to interfere is that even though these arrangements that China kind of tries to bring forth are more favorable than IMF arrangements, they reinforce market dependency in at some instances, and that means that China sometimes mitigates imperial finance, but without transcending the capitalist world system, and sometimes maybe even increasing its solidity. That's kind of the contradiction. That's the dialectical contradiction that exists in this. But this is part and parcel of the process of development, right? You need to have the necessary level of social and historical development of these relatively economically underdeveloped or overexploited areas for there to be socialism to begin with. So in the net, it is positive. But I understand the criticism, and I share it a lot of the time, right? Especially for my own country.
Yeah, no, and that completely links into the whole conversation. I can cut it slightly a little bit shorter than the details I was going to go in, because it's a point that fucking just properly sticks when it comes to like why does Beijing not directly involve itself sometimes even in people's movements, let's call it working class movements all around the world, different guerrillas, different movements that define themselves as revolutionary, etc., etc. And when looking at that particular choice, we must, like, to an extent, contextualize China historically and see what kind of thesis it developed based on what kind of experiences it's seen both domestically and abroad with the Soviet Union in particular. The sharp break with the Mao era during the reforms when, Beijing did support national liberation movements and, promoted Maoism as a global revolutionary line while still formally preaching non-interference. Today, China's foreign policy is far more, let's call it, cautious. It prioritizes stability in partner countries, sometimes even those ran by our standards, leaders of questionable repute. It prioritizes economic development and strict non-interference in internal political struggles. And you can read this as betrayal, I guess, or you can read it as a grim lesson from the 20th century. The Soviet Union, in a very courageous way, put enormous resources into backing revolutions and competing with the West militarily, and unfortunately, for many reasons we know, they had to pay a very high price for that. And Chinese strategies, that's what I mean, like historical context. This does not give him an excuse, nor does it say it's correct nor incorrect. Yes, I'm unironically going centrist on this because we do not know. History will unironically show whether this strategy is appropriate or not for building socialism. So anybody giving you a hot take on this to an extent is doing a semi-LARP. But Chinese strategies looked at what happened to the Soviets and drew a very brutal conclusion, which is the following. If the one actually existing large socialist state left gets overextended and destroyed, the world proletariat doesn't gain some sort of heroic memory. It loses its main material ally. So Beijing's line today is essentially defend the existence of a socialist state first, expand its economic and technological strength, build a more favorable global environment, keep ideology, kind of low key and avoid direct confrontation with imperialism whenever possible. That preserves the state project, but narrows the potential of socialist internationalism. So the risk is obvious, and I know some of you are shouting at your, car radio that you're listening to this on. Socialism does become nationally bounded and, strategically kind of technocratic, if you want to get libbed up. More about,
socialism everywhere at once, immediate communism now.
Now, it becomes more about managing, growth and balancing power than, just energizing class struggle.
Sorry, but we need to focus on vaccinating the children.
Yes.
I know you want immediate nuclear war so that you can wave a red flag around, but there's some measles vaccinations that need to go around first.
Fair. Absolutely. I mean, I even, let me put it this way. Two Marxists sitting in a room. Both of them, one can say are correct. They completely disagree. So, a Marxist defense of China's choice would say conditions are not ripe for aggressive export of revolution. The correlation of forces is unfavorable. The priority is to keep the socialist core alive, which is literally like, bro, we gotta let's first vaccinate a couple of kids before we deploy troops in fucking Wisconsin. Now, why am I saying
Miami.
as if the revolution is invading America? The LARP is too strong in me. I apologize. But on the other side, there can be a Marxist that says if socialist states never take risks on the international stage for the international struggle, we risk a permanent, transition that never transitions. A socialism that is always preparing the ground, but, never, let's say, sowing the seed, right? Like how many vaccinated children is it enough before you step up? Unironic question, right? And that's on the Chinese people, the Chinese state, the Chinese democratic state to decide. And whether they decide at the appropriate time or not will show the success or, God forbid, Jesus, knocking on wood, spitting on ground, and doing all the fucking ancient shit of its failure. That's literally it. That's the bet. That's the gamble. That's the choice. That's what necessitates great statesmanship. Yes, Hakeem.
Yeah. I think, and I have personally decided that 35 million Chinese casualties in a nuclear holocaust is worth the ideological purity that will satisfy my my personal right. Like I'm joking, but a lot of people's criticism does kind of almost boil down to things along these lines. Moving on, though, and this will be the most fun part. We're going to get into the real and serious criticism that we get, or not we specifically, but the Chinese perspective and those that will defend it or try to give the justification or contextualization that it deserves. Let's try to cover the criticism from certain Marxist ends. The vast majority of which, by the way, is from certain Maoist circles. So those are the ones I've kind of focused on. Not solely Maoist, but Maoists are the only one carrying out quote unquote serious criticism in that regard. Nobody takes Trots seriously, not even Trotskyists. So we're not going to bother with them. We want actual Marxists to criticize. So I've pulled from a couple of sources, like a little, I guess, addendum. I think I have read every single China is capitalist text that I've ever found. I have not found any one of them to be convincing, not one of them. But the ones that are commonly stated or recommended are, for example, the book From Victory to Defeat. There's certain pamphlets and essays and fairly long write-ups, actually, from the Communist Party of India, that's Maoist. The R. Filipino Maoist comrades also have made certain criticisms. There's one, I'm being cheeky, there's also one journal that I'm referring to. It's called the Chuang. None of you should ever bother reading it. It is garbage. It is the most clearly like CIA backed, like, quote unquote Marxist criticism. It's so fucking bad. But it came from nowhere, and it's had 2 installments like a couple of years ago, and then just disappeared. Their website's still up and everything, and their recommendations still up, but there's been no developments since. And I remember it was very difficult to get a hold of the first volume at the time when it first came out. So I had to task a friend of mine who had like relatives in London to go and visit those relatives and go to the one bookstore in London that had the copies of this so he could fucking bring this back to me. Yes, my Marxism is serious. Unlike you fucking... Anyways,
Nerdness is serious. So men like you are necessary, or we would all die.
It took me maybe 2 months to get a hold of this fucking thing. I will say the graphic design of it is beautiful. What is not is when you look at their resources, their sources, their sourcing, because you read these things, you're like, I mean, some of these points are very interesting, and then like, let me just check the source, and it's like the American Freedom Foundation's Anti-China Institute for hating Chinese people, right? It's very like I'm being
hyperbolic
with it, but it did have some bad sourcing, and then they have some like recommendations on their website on books that you should be reading about China, and it's like, this very like notable anti-communist figure who's made some like bad sociology study of China in like 96 or something, and they're still recommending it as if China's still the same China. It's just sus. But anyways, I've included their criticisms as well. I've kind of synthesized a general summary.
What's the most common one you found? What's the most common? Is it sure, like the individual private capitalists don't have all the power. That's because like the political strata has concentrated all of it, and they're like a super class that kind of manages everything. That's the most common, like fucking the one that I hear from quote unquote like well-intentioned academics and shit. What's the from your experience, which is far vaster than mine? What would you say is the most stereotypical China actually capitalist
I have actually bullet pointed them in a list of
Jesus
top
Christ.
to.
Okay, apologies for running in front
Perfectly
of
fine.
Our man's came prepared.
Yeah, all right. I told you I got 15 pages. 15 pages of this shit. Okay, so the first one is a common claim. I guess I would say the most common claim. Capitalist social relations have been restored at the point of production in China. This is the capitalist restoration thesis or hypothesis, which almost parallels exactly the nonsense that was written in about the Soviet Union. Like the TLDR summary of the Soviet Union is like maybe in the last like 6 to 8 months of the Soviet Union's existence, you could say that capitalism had been restored in any meaningful sense. From 89, the process had progressed, but it was still not a socialist system. It was still not a capitalist system, excuse me. So like they fall apart under deeper scrutiny. But there are some points that are useful, right? But I'll get it. This is the fundamental like rounding, not Trinity, but like the idol of Maoist criticism that stands atop of the hill. And the idea is that for them, socialism is not defined by state ownership or by party rule, but by social relations of production, which is a correct Marxist point, but they misinterpret it. I'll mention how. Through their perspective, China has restored capitalist relations because there's wage labor, there's hierarchical management or labor discipline. There's a very common anarchist parallel, by the way, which is wrong. Much respect to our anarchist comrades, but it's silly. Just like washing your teeth and having a bedtime is not authoritarianism. Labor discipline is not authoritarianism, and it's not necessarily an aspect of like existence of capitalism. Well, whatever, that's one of their claims. Profit-oriented production, for example, dominates everyday life or enterprise life. That's a very valid, for example, criticism comparatively. Workers sell labor power in some form. There are managers who control production. There is surplus that's extracted, and they argue that this is indistinguishable from capitalism, even if the state is the one mediating it instead of individual capitalists or groups of capitalists. So the claim is not that China has become a liberal capitalist country, but that there are capitalist relations in China, and the proletariat in essence does not constitute a ruling class in a meaningful material sense. Basically, political control by the party is insufficient because production is governed by capitalist logic instead of, like, I guess, along quote-unquote socialist lens. And what they mean by socialist lens is specifically like 1932, like planned economy, state-directed, that's usually what some Maoists mean. Some Maoists also have a different perspective, not only Maoists, by the way, but these are the common perspectives that we get. Some of them also include the enterprise or like the syndicate forms of enterprise control as well. That's missing in China, so as a result, it is not socialism. This is going to be very quickly laid to rest, this point, because they reduce these arguments reduce class power to basically shop floor relations. What happens just at the enterprise, and that's it. They ignore state control over the commanding heights of the economy. They can ignore state control over surplus, over investment, over credit, over finance, over land, accumulation direction. These things are huge insurmountable things that you cannot look over. Marxism does not define capitalism by wage labor alone. The most important thing is which class controls reproduction at the social level, and it is for a definitive fact, not the bourgeoisie, not the capitalist class in China. So at the very best you can claim, like to kind of like synthesize this into a coherent criticism of China, capitalist social relations have a presence because of market relations in China and the existence of private capital in socialist accumulation, and that risks an increased influence, ideological, social, and eventually maybe also political, of the capitalist class. Bourgeois relations can reproduce themselves in this circumstance, but they do not control or direct production currently. The profit motive and all these are questions of strategy. This is not what socialism is, because if the profit motive existing is problematic under a socialist government, it does not mean that it excludes it it does not excommunicate it from socialism.
The differentiation between utilizing the market and letting the market run your economy is heaven and hell contrast. Like I don't even know what allegory to give it. Like there's a difference between waking up in the morning and you're a horse guy, you got a horse outside. There's a very big difference between like servicing your horse and calling your horse your fucking lord and riding your horse. China's utilizing the market economy in certain aspects of its economy as the fucking horse that it rides, while us in capitalism we love sucking horse cock.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes. Exactly. And also, by the way, like a little point on this, anybody who says this, how many public and private statements of all the ghouls of Western imperial existence and like American foreign policy directives and the American government and the leaders of capital in the States, how many of these people need to verbatim tell you China is not a capitalist country, capitalists do not control the means of production? They use Marxist terms even. They're like, it is not. The social relations that exist in China are not that of a capitalist society or country or economic setup. They say it verbatim. How many of these ghouls need to say it to your face until you like absorb it? And I understand the appeal.
It is problematic, like as you said. It is problematic. Nobody's fucking under. And can it potentially eat up, like cannibalize the other part of the economy unless it's held on a leash? Of course, it fucking can. We are criticizing it. But to claim that it is taken over the Chinese economic system, do you have eyes? What the fuck are you talking about?
Exactly right. The secondary point, this is also very common. The party has become the bourgeois state apparatus in China, the Communist Party.
Yeah, that's like classic. Yeah.
This is kind of like the bureaucracy critique, but a little bit sharper and also more misplaced. There are certain currents that exist that the Communist Party of China has undergone class transformation. So instead of it representing, for example, a proletarian state that is somewhat distorted maybe in its representation, it has instead become the new bourgeoisie in power. They manage capital accumulation on a national scale, and hence they are the new bourgeoisie. And they're not defined specifically by private ownership or private ownership alone, but by command over the allocation of surplus, control over labor, their separation from the mass of working people, and the reproduction of certain class hierarchies. They believe that, for example, these managers or technocrats or cadres, they function as a ruling class, and their material interests are tied towards accumulation, stability of government, integration into global capitalism, and not towards developing socialism. This is the weakest criticism, really, because it's a non-Marxist criticism, because the relations to means of production are objective things that are measurable. Yes. It's not like, it's not vibes based, exactly like JT was saying in the beginning. This collapses administrative control and merges it into class ownership. They think that administrative control is class ownership. A bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie that cannot, in China, for example, a bourgeoisie that cannot legally own land. They cannot transmit firms or enterprises freely as inheritance. They can be expropriated at will. They are periodically purged or even killed. This is not a bourgeoisie in a Marxist sense. This is a politically subordinated stratum. Now, we need to differentiate. We mentioned earlier that there is a differentiation of these para-proletarian class, I guess, offshoots, right? Managerial subsections, for example, technocrats. And then you have the subsection of like private entrepreneurs that could be a germ of a capitalist class or an existing capitalist class. The people, managerial, technocratic, and whatnot, these need to be surveilled and controlled and politically molded and whatnot to be maintained in their proximity to the population and the working class, as well as the working class has to be given the opportunity to practice, and only given the opportunity, they need to take that opportunity and create those opportunities for themselves to participate on a mass democratic basis in economic and political life in China, particularly economic, so that they can prevent for example, separation of a technocratic managerial strata above the working class, number one. And number two, the private capital aspect and existence of some capitalists in China, those are problematic. But that does not mean it's not socialist, right? These people do not, just like I mentioned, right? You can't even, this is the simple, you cannot even legally own land. I don't know if, you don't, in the States is different, but where I come from, historically, there are certain landowner families that have owned huge swaths of land. I'm talking above, for 150 years or 200 years in their name, right? The Ottomans had a different system where they would you could lease the land from the Ottoman government, but you did not own it and you could not pass it off in inheritance and whatnot. So it was a different setup. But there were, in certain politically independent periods of Iraqi history, these landowners that managed to carve out huge land holdings that they would just pass father to son to son to son like that. That is a literal functional impossibility across enterprises, across for land. This is an impossibility in China in a way that would be politically expedient. In a way that you can impact the political direction of the development of these things. I hope all of this is clear as well, right? A politically subordinated stratum is a problematic existence. And it is something that is a very valid criticism to have. But this does not, in essence, mean that the social relations have changed in a way that the technocratic managerial strata and cadres and whatnot that exist have become a new bourgeoisie with their own relations to production. And as a result, their own material interests in its propagation that's separate from the working class.
Yes, especially beautifully put. Especially my main piece of evidence that the entire party is not completely compromised, and it's just a bunch of bros that are like, okay, we're gonna keep. And I'm oversimplifying, but I think people will understand that it's a bunch of bros that are like, okay, we're gonna keep both the capitalists and the proletarians in check, and whoever is at the highest level of party cadre, that's who actually accumulates all the real capital, all the real state power, all the we're the fucking G's and we get to do what we want, and everybody else thinks they have some control, including the capitalists and the peasantry and the proletariat. Sit in the background thinking that they're the main guys running this whole ship. The main argument against this is, why wouldn't they privatize everything at this point? Why would you keep your relation? Why would you keep anyone's relation to private capital, to private finance, and most importantly, to, again, the means of production in this kind of 50-50 state that the China is doing? Why not just unironically Russia yourself? I'm talking 1990s Russia. If the entire party cadre was compromised, they would do that tomorrow. They would literally, they could make trillions. They could make.
I'll tell you why. I know why they don't do it, Habibi.
And it's shot if you even think about it.
No. It's they keep up this grand conspiracy to personally convince ultra-left John in Wisconsin of his to not give him the satisfaction of him being correct, right? So they keep up this facade.
Continuously losing so much money that you could steal as the top creme de la creme of the party by, making sure that everybody has housing, making sure that everybody has healthcare, making sure that you have the, highest increase in life standards for everyday humans in your country in history, as a way to what? To annoy the ultra leftist. To it's a long term. They're very wise. They're long-term investing in their plan to continuously siphon money from the population by throwing money at the population.
By grandly reinvesting into the poorest subsegments of Chinese society.
Right. I'm Balkan. You're Iraqi. We understand corruption more than anyone else. We are the kings of this. Okay, give me a mayoral position in a village of 200 people, and somehow I will make $200 million out of it. These guys are not doing. This does not smell like that. This smells like fucking base type of patriotism on fucking steroids. That's what it smells like. It smells like something borderline metaphysical in their ideal of what they want to build as a people. that has existed as that people for unironically thousands upon thousands of years.
Yeah.
And,
but is channeled and
we're
crafted
gonna sell
through
out
the
for
socialist
shit.
existence of China, and people. And this is the thing: all of this underpins a like deep distrust or like skepticism of the sincerity of hundreds of millions of Chinese communists that have laid their lives down to create this system, and it's like, no, but it's not enough. I don't believe you. Like, this is like
They're just a mob.
There's some sus chauvinism in this that's very deep and needs to be
that as well.
Yeah.
That as well. Because it's an important point to bring up. Like most Americans are going to look at you weird, even when you talk about Westerners in general. Even when you talk about arguably the most in-your-face corrupt president since Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, right? If you bring up like, yo, this guy's like unironically just stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from the coffers daily, and Americans will be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But that same American or German, you say like, Xi Jinping's top G's in the party are stealing hundreds of millions and transferring them to their own accounts daily. Like a far higher percentage of those people are going to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for sure.
They do the Castro thing. They were like, oh yes, Castro is the richest man on earth. All the wealth of Cuba historically is in his personal name. I'm like, shut the fuck up. And they do the same thing with the Chinese. They did the same thing with,
Why would they continuously shoot also party cadres that are caught stealing something?
Yeah.
And now I know what they're going to say. I'm falling for propaganda. Oh, sure, you sacrifice one or two guys so that the entire
it's more than
ship
one or two
doesn't go.
guys. My dude, it is way more than one or two guys. Oh my god! But they're like, yeah, you gotta crack 50,000 eggs to make an omelet, right?
What do you want? Sorry. Endlessly, as Comrade ContraPoint said, endlessly critique power. I'm sorry, that was meta commentary. In an alternate universe, she is a Chinese citizen, like a party member, 55, on a some sort of forum online. I'm derailing, please.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I want to keep the contents of my stomach inside my stomach. So I will move on from the mention of liberal points. Okay, so the next point is one that comes up, and that's just because of a cultural fascination with the Cultural Revolution. As a basically like defeat of it was a counter-revolutionary break. I'm going to just go very quickly through this. The Cultural Revolution was more or less a necessary and historically correct attempt at rectifying certain political issues that existed in China at the time, which are way too in-depth to get into right now. But there were severe excesses that happened. Severe excesses is actually kind of an understatement. But the point is, the criticism of this is they treat the Cultural Revolution as a timeless model instead of a particular strategy in a specific point that should be organized in a particular way. Continuous mass upheaval of that type is not a stable mode of governance or economic for any sort of continental industrial society to develop. Marxism is a socio-historical process. It's not a clerical or liturgical it is not the Spanish Inquisition on everyday life. Like, there's more nuance there, but it's just a point I wanted to mention because it comes up in every single one of these resources that I've mentioned, by the way, that I read into just to summarize these points. The next one is the concept of the primary stage of socialism is an ideological cover for capitalist restoration. Now, the primary stage of socialism and stage development of socialism was mentioned by Marx and Engels and Lenin and Stalin and Mao and like every significant and even insignificant Marxist theoretician or figure. But for some reason, there's a distrust or a lack of belief in the Chinese assessment. By the way, if you were to look up the concept of primary stage of socialism in Chinese, in their particular journals and whatnot, there are treasure troves of information written about this. There's so much novel contributions of Marxism that have been done by the Chinese Marxists in the modern day. But anyways, they critique they reject the primary stage framework entirely, and they argue that is like an alibi for capitalist restoration or capitalist relations existing. They think that if market expansion occurs, there's private accumulation, then class differentiation is just a result, and there's no limit to this capitalist restoration. It's just socialism is postponed indefinitely. Class struggle is non-antagonistic. Contradictions are just technical issues. This. They think it's a rewording of Marxism to make it to allow it to justify capitalist restoration. This criticism, this assumes that stages are like ideological inventions instead of stages of socio-historic and political economic development. This assumes that these are ideological inventions instead of material constraints imposed by local like social, economic, political limitations, as well as constraints imposed by global imperialism. No socialist state historically has ever fully abolished markets under conditions of underdevelopment or outright without being limited or eventually collapsing or being destroyed in some way. Of course, limitations of market relations up to a point like the Soviets did was actively good, and it was something that, in my humble opinion, I think would be beneficial for the Chinese to discuss and think about. But I'm not so arrogant as to think that they have not done these conversations and have not interrogated the fuck out of this point and come to the realization that it's not yet time. I'm humble enough to realize that my mind does not counter tens of millions of Chinese Marxists. Some people,
but you don't
might
get
not.
it. All those tens of millions are making like millions of dollars every day.
Exactly.
I would
Exactly
pay to
right,
see
yeah.
a YouTube video called "One Hakim versus 10 million Chinese."
Exactly right. Oh my god. But yeah, so this is like maybe this is like a racist point of me as an Arab towards white people, because this is a very common criticism. There's a war on patience. Right? Everything must happen now. Everything must happen quickly. Everything must be theoretically pure immediately. And this is a kind of tendency that is very common in like Western criticism of socialism, particularly of China, but even of the Soviet Union at the time. And maybe it's because like the Chinese civilization and my own and so on is so ancient that like in the sands of time, we understand that things take many, many decades and centuries for anything worthwhile to happen. So as a result, patience is good, right? It's kind of underpins like the Iranian strategy against in their like resistance, even though I personally disagree with some of the things that they do and how they carry it out. But they have that perspective again because they're an ancient civilization. They have an understanding that no, you don't just pick up the phone and fire 47 fucking cruise missiles into somebody's home and then the problem is solved, right? But it is very tiring to see, right? These things take time. And I will, at the very end of today, there's a very short, like, soapbox monologue that I want to give. It's a single page long, but I want to underpin this, like this patience point. Let me go into the next one, and this is one we covered extensively, so we'll go very quickly through it. It's the China is a capitalist imperialist power. It is social imperialist, the same shit that they threw against the Soviets. Funny enough, the Chinese used to throw this against the Soviets. This is a bit of a controversial point, of course. They believe that China has become an imperialist power, social imperialist, because of capital export, because of infrastructure tied to commodity production. They're integrated into global value chains. There's disciplining labor or whatever. And they argue that just because surplus extraction may be kinder than Western imperialism does not change the fact that China participates in global accumulation, for example, of at the expense of peripheral, workers and peasants and whatnot.
Trade is imperialism, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Trade is imperialism, which is a bad point, but that is also disingenuous to their position. Some people have a more nuanced point where they believe that China is an emergent imperialist or a sub-imperialist power. They're not currently imperialist, but they are in that trajectory because of this. And we went through it earlier. I went through it earlier, and both Hugo and GT expanded beautifully. But this is, again, the failing of defining imperialism by capital export alone. It ignores Lenin's criteria and other subsequent criteria that have developed since Lenin: monopoly finance capital, surplus extraction via unequal exchange, military domination at some instances, control of global pricing power. All these things are in the imperial core. They're not in China. The Belt and Road Initiative harbors no monopoly control. There's no enforced structural adjustment. There's no political subjugation. There's no imposed currency regime. This is a state-mediated development financing. It's not imperialism. There's uneven parts of it. There's contradictory parts of it. There's some bits of it that can be problematic, but this is not what imperialism is. And to call China a imperialist power as a result of this, despite the fact that the math is not in your favor, right? Particularly with value transference measurements and whatnot, is tired. You don't want to do the work. This is you're engaging in ideological fairy tailing because it makes you feel good about. I don't know why you'd want to feel good about, like, oh yeah, by the way, China is not socialist. No, we have no recourse whatsoever. it is Baal or Moloch, right?
Yes.
It's this pagan idol or that pagan idol. Like, why do you get some sick pleasure in being so black-pilled all the time, even though you're wrong, right? It's Let's see. One point that I will mention that is the only valid point, and we will get into this. This is part of the next subsequent episode. Its national development of China has replaced proletarian internationalism, and this critique sees Chinese foreign policy as more nationalist and socialist or developmentalist as a subsequent, nuance. Anti-imperialism against particularly U.S. hegemony is not anti-imperialism per se. There should be a support for a global class struggle. That's what it is. And it's kind of this exporting revolution point. The Chinese don't back people's wars. There's no armed movements. There's no revolutionary parties abroad that the Chinese support. And this means that China is prioritizing its state survival. Socialism is within its own borders only. If it's even socialist, the global class struggle is a liability. They don't want to do it. And this is an abandonment of proletarian internationalism in their point. This is like developmental statism that's happening. There is a lot of validity to this point, but they mistake support for people's wars everywhere as the sole form of internationalism. We live in a post-Cold War world, in a Cold War II world, a nuclear world and system where preserving a socialist state against encirclement is itself a material contribution to class struggle because of multipolarity. We kind of elaborate on that. That being said, though, yes, Chinese foreign policy is dog shit. Hakeem signs on this. Chinese foreign policy is arguably the worst foreign policy that exists, aside from Czechoslovak socialist foreign policy where they would send guns to Israel. Aside from that, China is the absolute worst. I think Laos, like Khmer Rouge, Khmer Rouge, Cambodia, right? Pol Pot's Cambodia had better foreign relations probably than Chinese foreign. Yeah, we're going to get into this in the subsequent episode. Another one, this is kind of like a niche point. This is more common of Indian Maoist criticism. There's the Peasant Worker Alliance that has been broken down because China has dismantled the revolutionary worker-peasant, camaraderie that existed through rural dispossession of former peasantry, proletarianization, migrant labor schemes. There's an urban bias, and they consider this like as a betrayal of peasantry. There's several books actually written on this by serious scholars, and the work is actually fairly good. But the sighing of Hugo is very correct. Yes. They believe this is not developmental necessity of socialism or just development of capitalism even, but a class realignment to favor urban capital and technocratic control. And this is like you're missing the forest for the trees, I believe is the English saying. Yes. They are romanticizing semi-feudal conditions. Proletarianization is not a betrayal. It is the historical basis of socialism. Even if we were to believe that it's capitalist development, it is always a good thing that there are instead agricultural like laborers, workers instead of peasantry, because peasantry as a social form are they're a relic of the past, and they stand in the way of the development of socialism through perpetual existence. Of course, through unity in like revolutionary existence and whatnot, and combined development and whatnot in the Soviet Union, in Vietnam, in China. Yes, absolutely, they can be a revolutionary force. But the point is to eventually proletarianize all non-proletarian elements so that you can have a broad working class movement for the working class ideology that is socialism. The question is not about management or distribution. It's not about preserving peasantry as a revolutionary class indefinitely, because you can't do that. You're trying to freeze time when socioeconomic development, material development of economic relations requires that there be less peasants, no matter what economic system you're taking. Now, yes.
Wait till they hear about what our plan for class in general long term is.
Oh no!
Yeah.
What classes, bro? I don't think you're in the right group, bro. We gotta doing the opposite, bro.
Dude,
oh my god.
Yeah, I agree. But the fundamental, core bit that is correct here is that yes, there is a lot of rural dispossession in China. There are lots of people who are dispossessed or affected by migrant labor schemes. There are urban biases, but they're not because of some evil let's move this is not the closure of the commons that's happening. No. This is the developmental aspect. We discussed this earlier in today's episode is different. But yes, there's many problems there, and they need to be dealt with. But that does not mean it is not socialism. And now finally, where we're coming to the summary of the last two. I mean, this kind of builds up on the Cultural Revolution bit that, absolutizing struggle, if that's even a word, to make struggle absolute as an end in itself is a very common thing in Maoist points. There's a lot of stability is the supreme value, like harmony under heaven. Is a kind of racist term for Chinese existence. Instead of class struggle, everything should be harmonious, and there's a fear of the masses and engagement and struggle and all that kind of stuff. But no, this is there are ways of resolving contradictions. Not everything is an antagonistic contradiction, and antagonistic contradictions can be turned into non-antagonistic contradictions. Please, you're a Maoist, read Mao. Right? Suppressing
you do not have to shoot that kid for using a skateboard.
Exactly right.
It does not mean he loves capitalism.
Exactly, yeah. Suppressing destructive forms of struggle while advancing material conditions is not anti-Marxist. That's kind of the point there. There are other ways of resolving contradictions. And finally,
so beautiful.
Oh my God.
Fuck, that was eloquent. Sorry, I'm low-key
I love
hard
you.
this entire
Oh.
time. Like,
Yeah,
kinda
same.
stroking. Kinda.
Yes, please. Oh, let me.
Jesus Christ.
All right. This is the final, and I'm sorry, this is the longest point. I'm gonna bust your balls with
Let's
this one,
go.
boys. Okay, so if I were to like synthesize the critique of markets in China, I am sympathetic to this critique, but I don't share it 100%. There is a common and central argument that markets are not neutral technical instruments, even if they're politically regulated by a socialist state. Markets reorganize social relations. So that means that they systematically undermine proletarian power, even if capital is formally, regardless of whether capital formally rules the state. So if you introduce competition between firms, regions, workers, markets will fragment the working class at the point of production, and they will instead shift coordination from collective planning to more impersonal, individualistic value signals and so on and so forth, which would mean weakening the material base of socialist consciousness and relations of production and cultural and so on and so forth. So the idea of a socialist market economy is contradictory. It does not. Markets are not just like a temporarily expedient form, but they are shaping class structure, and as a result, they think that state subordination of capital, the Mao's critique, state subordination of capital is not enough if production is governed by competitive accumulation by markets, right? It doesn't matter if they're state-owned or whatnot, if there's cost minimization, if there's labor discipline, if there's profitability, if there's bourgeois norms of efficiency and managerial authority, then that means that there's, again, it links back into this technocratic managerial stratum who has different... So the rest of it is kind of nonsense, but there's that point of the market, that the market will displace politics, and as a result, this means that you're moving directional drift or shift from socialism and towards capitalist development. And the reply to this is, number one, yes, markets are a difficult thing to control, but markets are not inherently capitalist. Markets existed before socialism. They existed in slave societies. They existed prior to slave societies in Mesopotamian fucking like copper trading city-state unions prior to the enslavement of they existed under medieval, feudal, semi-feudal, pre-capitalist formations, for example, in the Arab world, and they will most likely exist after capitalism and into socialism. And their withering away is a theoretical question and a likelihood, but it is not the end all and be all. This is a very mechanistic form of Marxist analysis, I would say. Markets are tools, they're not classes, right?
Yes.
Without, and this is the point, without autonomous bourgeois political power, markets are not equal to capitalism. They are a subordinated mechanism within a different class structure. And there's like a deeper bit, unless you have a point.
Are they a potential gateway towards the capitalist mode of production re-entering through the main door? Sure, or through the back door? Yes, of course. But I don't really like to say, sorry for just for a second, it's like, alternative, please. Do you have the ultimate algorithmic state planning fucking ultra giga AI? Please, if you do, please fucking give it to us, and let's immediately centrally plan the whole fucking planetary economy, my friend.
No, you're right.
I'm joking, but I'm not. Unironically, we will. The process is messy and dirty, and we will be utilizing the quote-unquote tool set of our enemies, even though framing the market as only belonging to capitalists is wrong. But it is a process. Is it a problematic process? It fucking is, of course. But so is everything. So all of it can be co-opted. That's why it's class warfare. Well, sorry, Hakim, please. I'm just going.
And this is you're exactly right. But to even zoom out further, the main error of this type of thinking is that this reifies the law of value expressed through markets into an autonomous, self-executing force, like the prime mover. You're turning it into a god, astaghfirullah. You're treating markets as if they operate independently of political power, of class role, and historical conditions. This is a Marxist. This reproduces a form of economism that Marx rebuked and actively fought against. Not only Marx, but Lenin and Mao as well. Markets, first of all, they do not rule China. The political power is what rules China. Imperialism and capitalism are not defined by the presence of markets. They're defined by class control, or which class controls surplus extraction and state power, the relations of the means of production. Under socialism, of course, you can have subordinate instruments, and that's what different forms of capital is. That's what markets are. China's system is not market coordination with some political supervision. It is the political coordination using market mechanisms in which the state will control everything. Again, I keep repeating myself. Fucking land and finance and banking and strategic investment and macro and micro priorities, independent of profitability. It is majorly unprofitable to invest in so much shit that China's been doing, but they do it because it is actively a net good for the nation and for the people. It makes smart socialist sense. It makes no capitalist sense, but it's nonetheless done. I wonder why. It's because it's not a fucking capitalist system.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Markets are, Strafola, sorry for mispronouncing it, are gods in capitalist systems. Yes, they sometimes can grow into such a massive tumor that they co-opt, working class destiny away from them. But in another system where they are not allowed to grow into such a parasitic metastasis, they are not. It is not the process of turning the fakest thing of all time, the economy, into literal physics is the process of jumping into the ideological cesspool of capitalism. If you have not jumped into that cesspool, aka you have not integrated yourself in that particular system, then utilizing those, then you are riding the horse. You're not sucking its dick.
Exactly.
I'm trying to be like Hakeem gives brilliant explanations, and then I paraphrase them for frat bros and alcoholics.
Yeah, and you do it amazingly.
That is your specialty. It's fantastic every time.
Generally, it's exactly right. And this is kind of, again, like at the risk of repeating myself, but it might require the repetition. These arguments confuse worker power with just immediate shop floor control, like immediate communism now, right? This argument assumes that workers, unless they're exercising direct continuous control at the point of production, then there is no proletarian power is actively being eroded. And this is a definition, a category error. Not Marx nor Lenin, exactly right. Not Marx nor Lenin nor Mao ever, or anybody else, any major socialist theoretician, defined the dictatorship of the proletariat as universal shop floor democracy only, or even just as universal shop floor democracy. More importantly, they usually would define it as active political suppression of bourgeois rule and the subordination of accumulation to collective ends, with suppression of markets and the suppression of wage labor, total elimination, so like all these other aspects. Some of these are missing in China, and these are a very valid criticism that you can have. China is not the 1930s Soviet Union. Their economic plan is set up very differently than the ways that the Soviets did it. Their role of the market is way larger than it is, for example, in the Soviet Union. And these are errors. Yes, I personally believe that they are errors and they should be rectified. But at the same time, this critique ignores like the scale of China, encirclement, capitalist and imperialist encirclement, developmental time periods and whatnot. Socialism cannot immediately transcend markets, regardless of its there's an assumption, there you go. There's an assumption, an implicit assumption that socialism can transcend markets immediately, regardless of what material conditions exist, right? And this assumes that a country of 1-point-something billion people, 1.4 I believe now, with continental levels of unevenness, right? Post-colonial underdevelopment, permanent imperialist encirclement since its founding, that this markets...
People understand logistics. Do you understand? Oh
yeah,
my fucking God.
It's very difficult to... Yeah, and that's why it's like the most humbling experience for any of these people. These like I'm being fully honest. I'm not being rude here. These left-com armchair types, right? The most like humbling experiences for them to actively get their hands on state power and try to do it, because they immediately come to the reality of what it is to apply socialism to try to develop it, and they will fall into way larger pitfalls than the incredible work that the Soviets managed to achieve.
Or even a vegetable store. Or a vegetable store. Like make sure that there's 120 cucumbers, 320 tomatoes, 54 fucking celeries, etc. Always on time. That's first day. And then adapt how much based on how much you sell every day, on how many you need to order, how many spoil, how many don't actually arrive, how many arrive spoiled, etc. And then do that for like 3-4 months. Make sure that all of your clients are used to you running that particular shop in this, yes, particularly inefficient way, and then, have an incredible like top-down revolution where, the NKVD officer comes to you and says, immediately you need to like on the first day, the banners are rising, and on the first day he comes, I don't know, he needs to come with some sort of fucking chip to like immediately plug into your brain so that all of your information that you have previously gotten through market dynamics, you can immediately plug into the centrally planned system. Bruv, this takes time. Of course, you still, for like months, maybe even years, you're going to be a fucking mini fucking vegetable seller that adapts on how people buy as if the market still exists. This is...
and that's why... and that's why these ultra-left armchair types like to stick solely to endless critique, and they never have applied themselves towards political organization, and they for sure have never captured political power because they know they will fail implicitly, instinctively. They know that they will not be able to live by the weird ideological purity, the terms that they set themselves to. So as a result, they don't even bother trying, right?
It's also so lumpen. It's so lumpen. Like with the allegory with the shop guy, like you have to not understand how complex processes are that literally just get a cucumber from Algeria over into Spain, and to think that can like the process of transition is going to be so both transparent and efficient. Implies that you kind of like have never done anything. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Have you ever had a job? Have you ever like
no, they have not. I don't. Reading Bordiga endlessly is a job in and of itself because you have to continuously. It's a full-time job to continuously resist the urge to kill yourself. Take this from a guy who has very painstakingly. I'm not even going to get into it. Okay. I mean, all right. You need to realize that markets are tools. Markets are not ideological concessions. In certain instances, they can be used as coordination mechanisms for allowing for allocation of labor, absorption of certain surpluses, rural surplus, upgrading technology in like more minute senses, resiliences against blockades and crises. In certain governments or economic setups, abolishing markets prematurely could lead to reduced planning capacities, strengthening black markets, the enforcement, the need to enforce administrative like coercion, like harsher coercion politically to get things done. And that's coming from a person who, I don't like markets. I don't want there to be markets. I want there to be state planning only. But you have to be pragmatic about these things. So TLDR, yes, markets suck. We want to get rid of them. But the way and form in which they are restricted has to happen at a certain point. And also, by the way, if you exist in a capitalist country, in a capitalist world, right, in like your socialist island in a capitalist sea, at the end of the day, you will need to do international trade. So you will have to have a market of something. You will have to have commodity production of some form. So to these people, the commodity form can never be abolished. And as a result, the what's it called? You'll never be like, it'll never be socialist, no matter what you do. And that's where this stupid amount of
they could be a lot. Absolutely, and it could be a lot more like practical in the criticism, and arguably it could be decent criticism, even though it would be difficult to define what the appropriate timeline is. What am I talking about specifically is say, okay, you fucking pragmatic Marxists and Marxist-Leninists and so on are talking about these transitionary periods, etc., etc. How long is enough? Okay, ask me that question. That is a decent question. Very difficult to answer, but a decent question. Can we have a kind of, let's call it cap, kind of cutoff point in which you realize, okay, like Holy Mother of God, we've been utilizing the transitionary period argument as a way to integrate the market economy into the way the market into the way we manage our economy, partially, of course, et cetera, et cetera. We've been doing it for far too long, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we're hypocrites, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, make that point. Let's have that conversation. But just screaming these, as you beautifully put, like the fucking Inquisition. These like, oh my God, this is like they treat it as doctrine, as like
And that's the point. This criticism does not specify how a socialist economy of China's scale would be able or should coordinate production without markets under its current conditions. They give you vague platitudes of mass participation, moral incentives, revolutionary consciousness, but there's no concrete system of allocating labor, balancing regions, coordinating, managing scarcity, innovation, surviving imperial blockades. A Marxism that cannot explain how reproduction occurs, how you can fix these issues, is not revolutionary. It's just it's a dogma. And that's the thing. And of course, by the cop-out answer is economic planning. Let's plan better. Oh, you supercomputers. Yes. But that's also a fucking process. And that's what the Chinese are, very interestingly, now trying to do. Yeah. In Arabic, we say, just give them a fucking second. Give them a second. Right? And let them fucking work. And then let's see what they fucking get at. They're doing more than you are. I would gain more from the experiments of the Chinese, even if they fail, than all your fucking, not to be a broken record, to quote Engels, an ounce of practice is worth a ton of theory. Right? Yeah. Your theory is worth my balls at the end of the day. All right? If it is not directly applied. All right. Now I want to read you deliver the soapbox bit. So I hope you can bear with me. It's only one page. We're almost done.
Please do.
Okay. The Chinese, as I mentioned, I believe them to be politically socialist. Economically, they're in the primary state of socialism, which has aspects, markets and wage, all this kind of stuff, which in some instances, at some points in their history, were more oriented towards state capitalist formations. In some instances, more oriented towards direct socialist development. It's a fucking dialectical experience. Oh, who would have fucking thought? Now, why would China choose the system and the orientation and the setup that it has currently done? And I'm not going to go too far back, but after the Sino-Soviet split, there was a huge crisis in China. Fundamentally, China was an incredibly poor country, and people don't realize this. China was ridiculously poor. China was poorer than the West Asian, North Africa region when it started. Poorer than, I don't know if people listening have walked in some of the ancient parts of, or seen the poverty that existed in my region of the world was endemic and deep and structural and humiliating. And the Chinese were at a worse level than that. They got some leeway with Soviet support. Not that still the Soviets were reeling from fucking World War II and 20-something million people dead and massive industrial capacity destroyed and wiped out, but the Soviets still lend a helping hand. And the Chinese kind of carried on with this until the Sino-Soviet split, and then they were fucked. There was for the most part, no serious industrial base aside from iron and coal, like the very big, like pig iron and shit like that. There was, for the most part, no technical expertise. At the point, the vast majority of the population was still peasant with basically little to no education. The vast majority of people were still illiterate. Of course, literacy programs were coming into effect and whatnot, but you learned to read and write 10 years ago. You're not going to be a PhD in engineering, right? Mm-hmm. There is for the most part, no technically specialized machinery of any kind, aside from the few that they had, which were handouts from the Soviets or schematics that were given to them by the Soviets. There was relatively limited potential for growth in all scientific spheres, particularly in relation to production, prioritizing production, increasing its efficiency, developing it technologically, and so on. There was a general isolation from world trade generally, both the Western world as well as the Soviet bloc countries, aside from Albania, and even that didn't matter. And also fucking Albania is, sorry to say, as we say in Arabic, khari ala kharita. It means like a shit stain on a map. It's this fucking tiny, right? It's like the 20 Albanians that exist were sending fucking cups of sand to China. Like, I'm being, hyperbolic and a bit rude to our Albanian friends, but even that with Albania did exist. So China was basically on its own. So on and so forth. There's so many other examples I can give. There were major, near insurmountable obstacles that blocked the road towards socialist development with the existing setup that China had. There was an inherent backwardness culturally, socially, and in production. There was a lack of technical specialists. There was a lack of specialized machinery. All of this cannot be overcome with revolutionary slogans and Mao's Red Book. You can wave around all you want. It's not going to fucking all of a sudden make machines that can make computer chips. Productive forces aren't always permanently necessarily primary, let's say, but they cannot be ignored. Productive forces are very important. We have to be pragmatic for understanding the situation as it is. China at the era, as I keep repeating myself, was way too precarious of a position and had to, as a result, take very drastic and in some instances unsavory actions to further development themselves. And that is the opening up and reform and the reintroduction of market mechanisms and the reducing or the removal or the limitations on the iron rice bowl program and so on and so forth. Anybody who criticizes China at this point, imagine you were in that position. How would you have gotten China out of that predicament in the mid-70s, given the background I gave you? like there's a lot of info to give. Like you could say that it was the Soviets' fault for blocking off another like far superior avenue for development with more planned economies and whatnot after the Sino-Soviet split. You can blame the Chinese leadership a little bit, but they're kind of in the right in criticism of the Soviets a little bit at certain times. But could they have developed to the point that they've developed now, basically solely on Mao's policies and principles? I mean, like, heavy state industrial directed development with planned economies and so on. Sure, but it would have taken a lot longer, and it would be a lot more risky decisions would have to take, and this much more politically serious issues would have arisen for China, particularly around the late 80s with the decline of the socialist bloc. And their reversal towards market relations at that point was, in a weird paradoxical way, the way that they could maintain their political order. I mean, socialism staying in power, a socialist government staying in power. And I'm saying that with the caveat that I dislike some of the things that took China in that direction. This is the point. This is the point that I want to deliver, right? And it's this. Not all the Deng reforms were good. I don't, agree with all of them. But I've never seen an alternative course that made sense. Mm-hmm. I'll give a good example. Despite the literacy campaigns of the 50s, they weren't enough, considering the sort of modern economy China needed to develop. So you can be literate, but that doesn't mean you are even remotely competent at running any sort of highly complex or modern industrialized nation. You need economists, you need accountants, you need technical staff for the theoretical functioning of machinery, not just like vocational mechanics, right? Not just barefoot doctors, right? You need highly skilled legislative and organizational staff, so on and so forth. To get you these, you either train your own or you get it from somewhere else. Training your own is great in the long term, but not in the short because you have limitations. It takes years to train them and decades for them to get the extensive experience required so that they can do a good job, especially for such a large and diverse nation such as China. And China, in the grand scheme of things, reached this point that I'm talking about of having technical specialists that they have trained at several generations so they can have this accumulated like cultural and historical and social experience in these fields in engineering and medicine and like technical experience and whatnot. In the grand scheme of things, they reached this point in the past 15 years? In some instances, in the past 5. Literacy, it was the first step, right? It's a base. Real education afterwards takes decades afterwards to reach. And with the industrialization that China had at that point, it was not enough. And that's every higher level development was stunted by lack of expertise in machinery. I keep fucking repeating myself, and this is like an error of the Stalin mode of industrialization that you could blame. But there was some correct things with that. But this is just the paradox of history is when you're such a poor nation, you don't have the privilege and the luxury of being ideologically pure. You have to make concessions in ways that may not be ideologically convenient, but they might be the best thing that works out for your nation. Or let me just TLDR it. Chinese foreign policy is cringe. Markets can be cringe as well, but planning is better. And planning in China should be greater and more extensive and so on. But I'm sure they're doing that research. I've seen it, and I'm sure there's even more talks that we know nothing about. But given that knowledge, let's try to do better in our countries, in your country. And if you do better, then give us the blueprint so we don't have to do this fucking back and forth and all this stuff that you're disagreeing with for the person, the hypothetical person, the mouse on the wall in this case. And the final thing that I would say is if you really want to understand the Chinese system, then you need to read Roland Bohr's book, Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for Foreigners, which is such a stupid title, but it really is such a good book. And I will never stop talking to our audience, asking our audience to try to get this man on on the fucking podcast.
God bless.
That's my TLDR. All right, that was it. That was part 1 of the China series. There will be other subsequent parts of the China series. If you enjoy what we are doing here and the extensive amount of research and notes that these boys have written and preparation this took, then please do take a look at the Patreon. It is not just the privilege of supporting a bunch of revisionist cucks, but it is also
your favorite revisionists.
Exactly right. You also get extensive bonuses, exclusive and bonus episodes, maybe more coming down the line. In total amount that you'll be getting, you get merch benefits and discounts. You get access to a Discord server. Depending on what your pledge amount, you get to chat with us in live Q&As on the Discord. You get access to the Hakim healthcare plan for Americans. It is far cheaper than Blue Cross Blue Shield or what the fuck it's called. So that's another thing that you get. And yeah, with all that being said, this has been the Duke Program. I'm Hakim.
I'm JT.
And I'm your Gopnik. Ni hao, motherfucker.